We are live to YouTube.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. I think I'm just looking at my screen here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us. So we can begin the meeting. Are we expecting the clerk? Yep, there she is. Madam Clerk, are you ready to begin the meeting?
We are not yet live to Shaw, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, okay, sorry. Give it a minute then.
One minute to Shaw. Ten seconds to Shaw. And we are live on Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to welcome everybody to our special meeting this evening. I want to thank our media partners for reporting on our meeting and our broadcasting partners for broadcasting our meeting. I note I am wearing a mask. I'm wearing a mask because Councillor Sandra Hollingsworth, who will be chairing the meeting in my absence tonight, will be taking over for me shortly. Before we begin the meeting, I want to acknowledge that the land upon which we are meeting is traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. It is the home of Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council. I want to also recognize that it's the head office of Missinaibi Cree First Nation and the great work that the Indigenous Friendship Center does in Sault Ste. Marie. We thank them all. Madam Clerk, if we can begin the meeting, please.
I have a motion by Councillors Vezo, Allen, and Nero that the agenda for February 7, 2022 special city council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Motion is carried, and for the record, I indicate that Councillor Hollingsworth is also in favor.
And under agenda item 2, declaration of pecuniary interest, Mayor Provenzano has declared a pecuniary interest in the matter of the new official plan as the law firm has made a submission on behalf of a client.
Hey, Council, before I take leave, I wanted to explain that to more fully to both Council and to the community at large. Speaking generally, I was originally when I reviewed the letter that was provided by my law firm, and I didn't review that until this weekend, I was simply going to or intending to declare conflict only on the matters as they might relate to Maplewood Golf Course or the formerly Maplewood Golf Course property. But it's a bit problematic and a bit broader than that because the submission made on behalf of the property owner by my law firm is more broad than simply the matters that relate to Maplewood. There are submissions made with respect to the background document in general. And the reality is the background document is the document that's before council tonight for discussion. So I became concerned that if I ask questions about the background document or express opinion about the background document, it might appear that I was trying to advance the positions taken in the letter that was put forward by my law firm. And I wanted to make sure that I clearly didn't do that. And I thought the safest and best way not to do that would be to not participate in the meeting. so that nothing that I could be saying in the meeting or during the meeting could be confused as relating to specifically that property that's an issue or the background document in general. I know, council, that there's no decision before council tonight. We're simply here to discuss the background document of the official plan. I want to recognize Councillor Dufour, who raised this with the CAO and I, and suggested that since consultations were occurring on the background document, he thought it prudent that a consultation occur with City Council itself. That's how we got to tonight. Both the CAO and I thought it was a good idea to do that. So this is your opportunity to ask questions about the background document, offer opinion about the background document, and give comments about the background document. Because the letter from my law firm generally addresses the background document, I thought the safest course of action for me to avoid what would be a perceived conflict of interest would be to declare the conflict and to not participate in the meeting. So with that noted, council, I am going to relinquish the chair to Councillor Hollingsworth, who will take the remainder of the meeting. I appreciate your time tonight, and I appreciate the effort you're going to make to review this document, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. Have a good night.
So under agenda item 3, Peter Tenazzo, the senior planner, has a presentation for council.
Good evening, Mr. Tenazzo.
Madam Acting Mayor and members of council, I believe if we could go first to Mr. McConnell, the Director of Planning, who will give a very short introduction, and then he will in turn hand it over to Mr. Tenazzo.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Staff is very pleased tonight to be able to present the background paper for our new official plan. As the mayor noted in his comments, this paper was released to the general public at the end of September last fall, and we have been conducting consultations since. Actually, a great number of people have contributed to the creation of this document. In brief, staff have had 18 public open houses. We've met with 35 different groups, and we have held discussions with over 2,700 citizens on a face-to-face basis, many of which I should note occurred before COVID. I also want to acknowledge and thank all of the staff from both the various city departments and other public agencies that have contributed to this process. From the beginning, this process has been led by Peter Tenazzo. And as the clerk mentioned, Peter is here tonight to summarize the key policy directions that are being recommended. Both Steve Turco and Jonathan Kirkle from planning are also in attendance tonight, as they were responsible for individual sections of the overall document. So, Madam Acting Mayor, with your blessing, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Peter Tenazzo for the presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, staff will be happy to answer any questions or receive any comments that council may have.
And if I may say, before Peter begins, I just want to remind council for this evening, I know in the past, sometimes some of you raise your hands for a question. You're welcome to do that, or you're welcome to use the yellow hand on Zoom. Either or, use the technology or use your hand. And having said that, Mr. Tenazzo.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Just going to put my screen up here. Okay. And just to echo what the planning director said, many thanks to Mayor and Council for giving us the opportunity to speak to this very important project. I think a lot of planners throughout their career, many will look back on a career and say, you know, creating it for a municipal planner, creating a new official plan is probably one of the biggest and best projects that you have an opportunity to do over your career. And certainly it's been a long project for us, but we think that we're really going to move the bar forward here in terms of land use planning in Sault Ste. Marie. Now this presentation is intended to provide it's a high level overview of the findings and proposed policy approaches contained within the official plan background report, and of course to answer any questions council may have or to get any feedback from council. Just again, to be clear, we're not asking for council to approve anything as it relates to the official plan. Which brings me to the next slide. So we launched this project in 2018 with a comprehensive education and outreach program. As Mr. McConnell mentioned, we've attended dozens of local events. We've met with dozens of stakeholder groups. We've held 25 public open houses and tracked well over 2,600 individual conversations. Now we're essentially in the middle of our consultation program, and now we're pivoting, really pivoting our main focus from education and outreach to obtaining feedback. Based upon our current timelines, I will say there remains ample opportunities for further discussion and feedback up to and including presenting the new official plan for council adoption, ideally later this summer. So please, to this end, we urge councillors, the public, please contact us directly if you have any questions or comments, or you wish to be involved. And at the end of this presentation, we'll put some contact information up for everybody. So based upon the current process as shown on this slide, the next milestone really is to release the draft official plan. And that's proposed to happen in March. And then at that point, we'll be sending it to the province for preliminary review and comment, while at the same time consulting with the public. Now, the timing of the preliminary provincial review, it's somewhat unknown. However, the province does strive to have comments within 90 days, at which point I would suspect there's likely to be additional discussions between staff and the province. So, while in some respects, the timing's out of our control, but because the province is the ultimate approval authority with the ability to modify the OP, we do feel that it's time very well spent to get their comments and feedback before we ask council to approve or adopt the plan later this summer. In terms of what is an official plan, it's the development blueprint of the community for at least the next 20 years. It's the top land use planning document in the community. And it is a statutory document that has to be consistent with provincial policy, and then all other land use documents such as the zoning bylaw and land use decisions such as council decisions on rezoning applications, for example, they all have to be consistent with the official plan, which by itself has to be consistent with the provincial policy. So that's the framework that that's the provincial land use planning framework, so that all local decisions and planning documents ultimately have to be consistent with that of the provincial policy statement and other provincial plans. The current OP was drafted in 1996. While it's certainly, I think, served us well, and we have kept it somewhat current with numerous amendments over the years, it is time for a fresh start. Now, you have to start with some overarching themes, and we have 8 overarching themes that really inform the overall policy directions of the new official plan. And I am going to I'm going to read through each of these because I do think that they're important, because ultimately, again, the majority, most of our policies and proposed policy approaches should always relate back to one or more of these overarching themes. And you will see, and if you read through the background report, there is a fair bit of overlap where there are a number of policies that maybe relate back to a number of these different themes. So first, we've got healthy community, which supports healthy living, active transportation, access to passive and active recreation, social interaction, and the creation of spaces that are comfortable, safe, accessible for all ages and abilities. This would be that 8 to 80 cities concept. Next, we have environmental sustainability. Official plan policies need to support energy conservation and efficiency, improved air quality, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and our planning has to recognize and adapt to climate change as well. Integrated mobility, support accessibility and choice of a diversity of transportation modes. Sense of place. We want to create spaces that foster a welcoming place for all, that establishes connection and provides a memorable experience for visitors. sustainable growth. And for us, that primarily what that really relates to is growth from within. We want to stimulate the reinvigoration of neighborhoods to provide a complete range of housing, services, employment, and recreation, all within that same neighborhood. Economic resiliency, we want to support the growth and diversification of the city's economy. Social equity, we want policies that contribute to creating a welcoming and inclusive community, focusing on the removal of systematic barriers so that everybody has access to an accessible standard of living and can fully participate in all aspects of community life and really fully participate in the planning process. And then cultural vitality. And this celebrates our long, rich history, diverse communities, and natural and cultural heritage, certainly with the downtown as the Sioux's core destination for arts and culture. So these are the overarching themes for the new official plan. One of the backbones of any official plan really is, what you're looking at again is what's your overall demand for certain things, residential, commercial, institutional, services, and then what's the supply. So really the population projections in many respects form the basis of determining future demand for services, housing, commercial space, and employment lands. Now, all of our projections were completed by Dillon Consulting and Metro Economics. And essentially, we're anticipating growth that would bring us back to, let's call it the pre-decline population levels in the late 70s or early 80s. So we're looking at to 2036, we're looking at an increase of about 10,000 people to this community. Now, the overwhelming majority of the growth will come through in-migration, that being people moving to Sault Ste. Marie to fill job vacancies, left in many cases and primarily from baby boomers. Now, while virtually all of North America is aging, Northern Ontario populations, or in general populations that have remained stagnant over the last 40 years, tend to be older. So things in Northern Ontario and Sault Ste. Marie are certainly a little more pronounced than they might be in other places. Now, due to our aging population, deaths significantly outweigh births. So without significant in-migration, our population projections actually look like it's significant decline. I've seen some numbers that would bring us down into the 60,000 range, and that would be, again, births and deaths in the absence of migration. Now, we also, I think, need to be cognizant that we're competing with these, we're competing with much of North America for a lot of these workers. We're certainly competing with the entire province, if not country, for these workers. And then adding to this, an increasingly mobile and remotely located workforce, it really places an emphasis on quality of life attributes that will draw people to our community. And, there's certain attributes that you can plan for and certain attributes that you can't. And I would suggest that, in Sault Ste. Marie, we've got a lot of those attributes that you really can't plan for, and that you either have them or you don't. We have world-class outdoor recreational opportunities, for example, which are things that are very difficult to plan for. So I think we actually, as a community, have a lot going for us. Now, the basis of these population projections really is about job growth. So not only are we anticipating an increase of about 5,900 new jobs, we're also projecting some changes within these various job sectors. So health and social services is projected to see the largest increase. Again, much of this is related to serving the aging population as well as the increasing population. Manufacturing, which has traditionally been our backbone, we're projecting to see a bit of a decline there. And then various other service-related sectors will grow. However, many of these are in support of a growing population. Again, the key here is that significant retirements are happening and will continue to happen, and those vacancies need to be filled. Statistically speaking, it's generally younger folks that are willing to fill these jobs and move and fill these jobs. However, anecdotally, there also appears to be a trend of retirees moving here from elsewhere. Certainly, we've seen this within the last 2 years, and we've also seen a fair bit of development. But really what it is we remain a fairly affordable place in comparison to other parts of the province, namely Southern Ontario. And again, anecdotally, we're finding some folks that may have a connection to the Sioux have decided that, you know what, they're going to sell the nest egg in Southern Ontario and move up here to Sault Ste. Marie. And certainly there's been, fairly significant development volumes within the last 2 years, and I would suspect over the next few years as well. Certainly the most that I've seen in the 18 years that I've been with the planning department. And I should note that the latest StatsCan data will be released very shortly. So it will be interesting to see where we land with regards to our actual 2021 population. Growing post-secondary enrollments and the student work visa program also represents an important part of our projected growth. And we've certainly been seeing that with both Sault College and Algoma University. Before I leave this slide, it sort of brings me, I don't want to, well, we'll call it the elephant in the room. And certainly a very common question that we've been getting, which is what, if any, effects has or will COVID or the pandemic have they had on these projections? And I think the short answer at this point is that we really don't know quite yet. With regards to commercial development, for example, on the retail side, we've heard suggestions that, COVID is just a bump in the road, while others suggest COVID is more than that. It's cemented the online shopping experience. I think the same holds true for local office space. Some suggest employers will call workers back right away. Others say that for many, working from home is here to stay. So we'll have to see how that plays out, especially as it relates to commercial land demand going forward. Certainly in general terms, it would appear that COVID is maybe impacting things like inflation and what we spend our money on. I think vacations versus staycations, for example, I think we've seen over the last couple of years, a fair number of people that are fixing up their home or their backyard, potentially buying a cottage in the area or an RV, for example. So in some cases, the pandemic certainly over the short term has shifted some of our leisure activities to more of an outdoor type of thing. But to close, in generally, we feel that our population projections are accurate. And when you look at kind of what's happened since our population projections and some of our housing projections, we're about in line with what is happening right now. So the population and employment projections determine demand. The next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about the supply side of things. So what are the land requirements? What land do we require to accommodate projected growth? And I mean, this is a critical element of any official plan. So I'll start with housing. From a housing standpoint, we're anticipating the need for about 4,000 new dwelling units. And based upon available vacant residentially designated serviceable land, we do have a relatively small surplus of about 45 hectares. Now, to err on the side of caution with regards to this is to have a healthy surplus, which helps with affordability and choice in the market. To this end, we are proposing a number of small urban settlement area expansions that will also add about 124 hectares of the current vacant serviceable supply. All said, we need about 4,000 we need enough land for 4,000 dwelling units. With the proposed urban settlement area expansions, we feel that we can accommodate over 6,000 dwelling units at this particular time. And this, again, is in the absence of other policies that we're proposing aimed at, encouraging residential intensification, mixed use developments in some of our commercial areas, as well as recently approved second unit, the ability for anyone in a single detached home to put a second unit in their basement, for example. So this will certainly facilitate a number of additional infill dwelling units above and beyond the vacant land that we currently have. In terms of new dwelling unit construction, I do note that we projected that an average of about 150 units would be constructed per year between 2016 and 2021. And based upon, we've gone through that time frame, based upon building permit data, we actually built an average of about 94 units over that time frame. With 2021 seeing the most at about 133 units. So as previously mentioned, we are comfortable that our projections are relatively accurate even in light of recent, the recent uptick in development that we've seen. And to this end, we will continually monitor our demand and supply projections within the required 5-year comprehensive official plan update intervals. And certainly if we've missed the mark somewhere, at least every 5 years, we will review that and make adjustments if necessary. So the proposed housing split, which is what type of housing are we going to need going forward? That's determined using household headship rates, which is essentially, it's the likelihood that a person of a particular age will reside in a particular type of dwelling. So really it's a function of demographics and affordability. So for example, young adults and seniors are more likely to reside in what we'll call downsized dwellings, things like townhouses, apartment units. And then middle-aged folks, often with families, tend to reside in single detached and semi-detached homes. So within the local context, prior to 2006, our local housing split was about 90% single detached homes, 10% everything else. Since 2006, based upon building permit data, we're actually seeing about 50% of all of our dwelling units that have been created, only about 50% of them are single detached and 50% everything else. And that's on average. We've had some years where we had actually far more everything else than single detached dwellings. Going forward, if we're at kind of a 90%, 10% split now, going forward, we're projecting an increase to about 20% everything else. So I should rephrase that. We're projecting a decrease of about 10% in terms of the overall dwelling split, so that instead of 90%, 10%, we're going to have 80% singles and 20% everything else. And we've certainly seen that in the last really 10 years in terms of the types of housing that have been built. So in terms of other land uses, certainly residential is a core piece here, but we also looked at commercial lands, institutional lands, industrial lands. As far as commercial lands goes, we have a small deficit really of commercial lands and a healthy surplus of industrial lands. What we're doing is we're proposing a new commercial industrial land use designation that will facilitate heavier commercial uses and lighter industrial uses, therefore making up for the small commercial deficit. We also have a small deficit of institutional lands, but we're recommending permitting a variety of institutional uses in more land use designations to make up for this deficit. So as it relates to identifying or redesignating lands, additional lands for commercial, industrial, or institutional, we have designed other policy approaches to sort of satisfy those needs going forward. So this map provides us with an idea of where, an idea of those vacant lands that are out there. And you can see, much of our residential land. So the red line here, this is the urban settlement area boundary, and not to be confused with the urban service line. So the urban service line, in most cases, it's synonymous with the urban settlement area boundary in most cases, but the urban service line really reflects where we have services, whereas the urban settlement area boundary is it's a provincial policy line that essentially dictates development within your urban settlement area happens at urban service densities. Development outside your urban settlement area occurs at rural densities. So locally for us, what that means is if you're inside, you're in the urban area, and if you're outside, you're in the rural area. This would be the Black Road industrial area, and we have also identified some of these investment-ready industrial lands. We've got just over 300 hectares of those. And these investment-ready lands are lands that are vacant, designated industrial, serviced or easily serviced, and then adjacent to a good source of power and natural gas distribution. Again, you look at some of the residential areas, it's generally our bigger residential vacant lots are out towards the periphery of the community, out towards the edge of the current urban settlement area boundary. Commercial vacancy is also important, and ideally, when you go back to one of our overarching themes, Ideally, we want to see existing, the adaptive reuse of existing buildings before new development occurs. So as far as vacancy here in Sault Ste. Marie and comparing our vacancy rates to other communities, in terms of retail commercial and shopping center commercial, our vacancy rates are about double the average of larger cities. In terms of office space vacancies, we're actually in line with the averages that you find in some of the other major cities throughout Canada. So next is really what types of development do we encourage and where do we encourage it? So first and foremost, we, as I've previously said, we do have the available land to grow from within. So with some very minor alterations to the urban settlement area, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we do have the available land, and we will encourage the overwhelming majority of new development to occur within the urban settlement area. We also want to encourage development within existing nodes, along corridors, and in close proximity to large-scale activity hubs. So a node is defined is a defined area containing significant development. Ideally, nodes include a mixture of commercial, institutional, employment, and residential uses, but certainly locally, this isn't always the case. Examples of nodes here in Sault Ste. Marie would be, Second Line Cora Road area, Pine McNabb area, and then obviously our largest node, which would be the downtown. Corridors, locally corridors for us would be our arterial roads, Queen Street, Second Line, Great Northern Road, for example. And then we've got these large scale activity hubs. And really what these are large uses generating significant activity, but they may not be located within a defined node. Algoma University would be a really good example of this. It exists really primarily within a residential area. Sioux Area Hospital, I think you could argue, might be another example of a large scale activity hub. And we've got a number of them here locally. We also want to emphasize development that fills land use gaps within some of these nodes, corridors, and large scale activity hubs. So for example, let's look at Daisy Road, for example. Daisy Road has some higher density residential development, but no real amenities, no real commercial amenities or social services. I think you're over a 1 kilometer walk to the nearest grocery store if you live in some of those higher density developments on the east side of Daisy Road. So really the land use gap here would be appropriately scaled commercial and even some social service facilities that would fill that much needed land use gap. Great Northern Road, Second Line area, and even a little north of Second Line on Great Northern Road would be an example of a significant commercial node, which could benefit from some nearby or additional nearby residential development. Now, certainly notwithstanding some pedestrian concerns that will be addressed, one could live in this area, for example, and have very little need for a car or even public transit. Virtually everything that they would need could be within walking distance. Now, the current official plan views the downtown as the administrative center of the community. We have been shifting this focus to viewing the downtown as more of a complete neighborhood, the social, cultural, commercial, and residential center of the community. That's live, work, and play. And I must mention at this point that a lack of a grocery store in our downtown was certainly, the lack of a grocery store since Walmart closed is a definite land use gap, and certainly one of the most common comments that we received through our outreach was the need for a grocery store or a larger grocery store downtown. There certainly are some smaller stores where you can get some groceries, and that's quite common in many of our residential nodes or our residential areas. The way our community has kind of developed, there's not much in the way of mixed use developments. It's a lot of segregated commercial, segregated residential, and the goal is to try to blend some of that together, again, in an appropriate way. Now, I had talked a little bit about this. I want to show you some of the urban settlement area expansions that we looked at, and we're viewing these as being minor alterations. And generally infill in nature. So if you look over in this area, this would be the hospital area. So this would be Great Northern Road and Third Line. We're proposing to add about 16 hectares of land here and about just shy of 40 hectares of land on the north side of Third Line across from the hospital. And I would suggest that, you know, in this area, the development potential is likely residential. In this area, it's probably a mixture of potentially some residential uses and some institutional uses. And basically, as you can see, and moving over here, we're looking to square off, simply to square off. This is really an administrative change. Urban Settlement Area Amendment, proposed Amendment 3 is really more of an administrative change to square things off. We are proposing to add, again, just shy of 40 hectares here. This would be People's Road, just north of Third Line. And again, this recognizes the existing residential subdivision to the north of that industrial area, and then it brings in a vacant rural property, I guess, a former farm that sort of is sandwiched between the residential neighborhood and then the industrial area here to the south. As far as the future development potential of that area, it's probably either residential or industrial, keeping in mind that there's some significant land use considerations here that have to be addressed. Primarily as it relates to making sure that there's adequate separation between the industrial and residential areas. And then Urban Settlement Area Amendment number 5 would be adding about 30 hectares. This would be the Garson Farm, or the Garson Farm property, and that would be the area below the hill. And generally speaking, as you can see from here, really with the exception of the one of the hospital, these expansions really round out our current urban settlement area. In most cases, they've got services. In all cases, they've got services on 2 sides. In some cases, they've got services on 3 sides. So again, we feel this is an appropriate expansion of our current urban settlement area. So as far as the proposed land use designations go, right now we've got 6. We're proposing a total of 13, and the new ones are underlined. Essentially where those will be. So some of our newer ones that we're looking at right now, the zoning bylaw, this is the Precambrian uplands area. The zoning bylaw has established it as a no development zone for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of landlocked properties up there, very little frontage on owned and maintained roadways, pretty significant topography. We're looking to upgrade that essentially to the official plan level, so that at an official plan level, it is a no development zone. We're also looking at a new mixed employment land use designation, and I spoke a little bit about this earlier, but this is it's a commercial industrial designation, and really what it's intended to do is facilitate some heavier commercial uses and lighter industrial uses, essentially utilizing the healthy industrial surplus that we have to make up for the slight commercial deficit. And some of the areas where we are proposing that designation, there's some pockets here on Second Line near Great Northern, just west of Great Northern Road, the west side of Black Road, a couple properties here where South Market joins with McNabb Street. So there's not a lot of areas we're proposing that, but certainly we're in many cases trying to underline or underscore the type of development that's actually occurring in some of these areas. Really, it's your sort of commercial industrial plaza type development. Aggregate extraction, right now we have an aggregate extraction zone, much like the Precambrian upland zone. We're looking to upgrade that, so to speak, to the official plan level. And this is intended to protect the provincially significant aggregate area of the community. These are the sand and gravel deposits that are just south of the shield line. Existing lots of record can certainly be developed, but we will continue with the current not permitting new residential lot creation in this particular area. We're proposing a new waste management designation, which would apply to the landfill, as well as a buffer area around that so that we can control the development of sensitive uses in close proximity to the landfill. Community parks. This is proposed to be applied to large-scale parks and community facilities that tend to be a destination from from throughout the community and beyond. Examples would be the John Rhodes Community Center, Hiawatha Park would be another example. And then finally, we're proposing a new open space land use designation. And this has been applied to certain environmentally sensitive areas. You can see it out here, some creeks, streams, wetlands. It's also applied to certain areas as a buffer. So around the East End sewage treatment plant, around the block, between the Block Road industrial area and the Manitou Park subdivision. And we also apply it to golf courses. You can see the Sioux Golf and Country Club here. Okay, some other notable land use policy directions that we're proposing. Community hubs. And right now, it's a bit of a gap that exists in not only our official plan, but our zoning bylaw. And we really want to explicitly permit the grouping of a wide variety of social, cultural and recreational services in one facility. In many cases, this happens already, but we really want to enshrine that and support that, because that's the best way of doing things, is to have a lot of these different facilities under one roof. We also, we really want to take some time and spend some time in recognizing the size and scope of certain land uses. There's certain uses that we need to better differentiate at the OP level as well as at the zoning bylaw level. A couple examples of this would be contractors' yards. Right now, we have two types of contractors' yards, but we know that from a land use impact standpoint, there are far more types of contractors' yards that are out there. For example, you've got some of these small subcontractors, like an electrical contractor who may have no heavy equipment and may not require any outdoor storage. Right now, that small contractor is required to go into at least a medium industrial zone. So we want to spend some time and try to further differentiate some of those uses. Office space would be another example of that, where I think we have a very broad definition of office space, which could be further defined to help in allowing certain offices outside the downtown versus inside the downtown. And we'll get to that. Home-based business is similar to recognizing the size and scope of office uses and contractors' yards. We do need to spend a little bit more time and effort in recognizing the size and scope, really with an eye towards allowing additional uses, like things like maker spaces, artist studios, which may currently be viewed as more commercial or even industrial uses, to locate as a home-based business. Of course, this comes with appropriate, you need appropriate controls to ensure that these uses don't adversely affect the residential character of an area, especially in terms of noise and traffic. But we do feel that there are some gaps there, and that we could allow some more uses as home-based businesses, which really helps the small startups out there that might not have the size yet to be in a commercial or industrial space, and can be appropriately located in their home, certainly at the startup phase. And land use compatibility, I talked a little bit about that. Our current official plan was developed before these D-series guidelines or land use compatibility guidelines were in place. And in the new official plan, we have to implement these guidelines to ensure that new or expanding industrial uses are appropriately separated from nearby sensitive uses such as residential, or vice versa. And we certainly locally have some legacy examples that we would like to avoid going forward. Algoma Steel has some residential neighborhoods right beside it. That People's Road industrial area that I showed earlier, and then Sackville Road would be another example. And you can see from the slide here that these D-series guidelines actually create three classes of uses, and then you have your minimum recommended separation distances and potential influences areas along with those particular types of uses. So going forward, this is something that we're going to have to address. Now, on the affordable housing, this is there's increasing conversations happening at all levels of government, including the federal level, on the affordable housing issues that are happening, certainly provincially, but locally as well. On the home ownership side, we feel that we are quite affordable. Although recent sales statistics show that listing prices have risen in the last 2 years, at this point, we still feel that about 50% of home ownership households can afford the average resale home price, compared to the provincial average of about 19%. So, we're significantly more affordable than the entire province in general. On the rental side, not so much. We are on par with Toronto, and about 3% below the provincial average. About 44% of renter households in Sault Ste. Marie can actually afford the average rents locally. But there are a number of some of the policy directions that we're proposing at this point, again, from the overarching side of things, supporting infill development, residential intensification, the adaptive reuse of existing buildings, accessory dwelling units. It's recognized that these types of developments also often lend themselves well to being able to provide affordable rent, as opposed to your new greenfield developments. We're also looking at reduced development standards for affordable units. When I say reduced development standards, things like parking, for example, not requiring as much parking as we would otherwise. And then also looking at some potential incentives, although that certainly requires some additional discussion through various departments as well as council. So urban design and mobility. Promoting the development of complete neighborhoods where residents can easily access a diversity of amenities, services, and housing options, as well as complete streets which comfortably accommodate multiple modes of transportation. These are really the cornerstones of urban design and mobility. And hopefully, as I've been talking throughout, you've heard me reference some of these sort of high-level policies here. As far as a complete neighborhood here in Sault Ste. Marie, I would suggest that maybe the Rosedale area, which maybe between Cambrian Mall and Pine Street, that's probably one of our better examples of a complete neighborhood. It's near major institutions, Sault College, Group Health Center, and there are a wide variety of commercial amenities, ample park space, Rosedale Park, which happens to also be central to the area, a number of different mixed housing options, and everything is within easily walkable distances. Really, when I previously talked about nodes and corridors and land use gaps, there really isn't much in the way of a land use gap in this particular area. As far as complete streets, Queen Street between Church Street and Churchill Boulevard, I think is a really good example of a complete street here in Sault Ste. Marie. It's designed to accommodate different modes of transportation. You've got motor vehicles, the cycling lane, sidewalk on one side, hub trail on the south side. It also accommodates transit users. Excuse me. And I should note that this is an example of a fairly recent road diet where it went down to from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. And really it was the elimination of that one lane that allowed the inclusion of the cycling lanes and the hub trail. And I think it works quite well. Excuse me. Here is a map showing our cycling infrastructure as well as our street classification. We're really not proposing any significant changes or alterations to the overall street designations. And certainly, I think if you were to look at this map 10 years ago, the big change that you would see here is there would be very little green or very few on-road cycling lanes. So that's certainly been, we've certainly seen an increase in on-road cycling lanes, a significant increase over the last, maybe not even 10 years, 5 years. So earlier I talked a little bit about, and certainly the on-street cycling and our trails and that, speaks to sort of those quality of life attributes, really parks, recreation, arts, culture, and heritage. That is a big part of the quality of life attributes that we're able to provide to our residents. Community parks. So the park space system in Sault Ste. Marie, it consists of, it's a bit of a hierarchy. You've got your community parks, which I spoke to a little bit earlier. These are your citywide and beyond destinations: John Rhodes, Northern Community Center, Hiawatha, to name a few. Neighborhood parks. These are your smaller scale parks that serve an immediate neighborhood. Programming and equipment generally focuses on active recreation, geared to youth. But there's certainly, with an aging population, there's certainly a shifting focus to more passive recreation for a wider range of people, small trails, benches, some shade trees, things of that nature. And I should note that it is possible for community and neighborhood parks to have attributes of both. Then we've got parkettes. These are these small parks, usually in the downtown core, that provide small scale leisure amenities, as well as cultural and social interaction opportunities. March Street Stage would be a good example of that. And then as far as our trails, and we've got, kilometers and kilometers of both formal and informal trails throughout the community. I would say that the Hub Trail would be probably the best example of that. Excuse me. Now, this is one of my favorite maps. And really what this shows is it shows local park coverage utilizing an 800-meter safe walking sort of buffer around each park. So 800 meters represents about a 10-minute walk. And by safe walking areas, what we mean is this is a 10-minute walk without having to cross any unsignalized arterial road intersections. Essentially, the yellow areas represent urban residential areas that are not within 800 meters of safe walking distance of an existing neighborhood park. Now, in some cases, the gaps exist because approved subdivisions have not expanded or been developed to a point where public park space has been developed as of yet. An example would be, towards the east end, the Queens Gate area, the East Side subdivision area. In other cases, a strategically placed pedestrian infrastructure, such as a catwalk or a PXO, can certainly create additional coverage. And an example of this would be in Bellevue Park. Prior to locating the PXO on Queen Street, much of the neighborhood on the north side of Queen Street actually didn't have easy, safe access to Bellevue Park because you had to cross Queen. So this is a really useful map, certainly going forward in trying to determine, are there ways that we can fill some of those gaps? And then going forward, as we are looking at additional development in the community, should we be taking parkland land or should we be taking cash? And that sort of brings me to this next slide here. Some of the notable policy directions, parkland dedication, and I think this is probably one of our biggest points, is that we currently don't collect parkland or cash in lieu of parkland for as nearly as much development as the Planning Act actually allows us to. And really, quite frankly, we think we have an opportunity to collect more here. We also propose more specific policies directing the collection of parkland versus cash in lieu of parkland. And again, that map would be a significant tool for us in doing that. So for example, if an area is already well served by a park, maybe at that point you take the cash and potentially put it into that park, given that there's new residential dwellings going up in that area. Public access to the waterfront. Now, this was probably one of the more common comments that we received, in that people really cherish some of these public access points that we have. And as a community, we have a number of city lots or unopened right-of-ways. Examples would be the bottom of Fournier, the bottom of Shannon Road, Upton Roads. And from time to time, the city gets requests to sell these as waterfront lots. And the new OP proposes specific policies to keep these access points publicly owned and available. New uses in parks, we also propose specific policies to allow for and assess the appropriateness of permitting new uses in parks. Examples would be, recent examples would be the RC track at Wilcox Park and the community garden in Forest Park behind the former St. Bernadette School. And this would give staff a bit of a criteria that they could use in assessing the appropriateness for whatever is being proposed at that particular park. We're also proposing 5 locally significant heritage areas to protect the overall character of these areas. This is not within the framework of the Ontario Heritage Act, but rather a locally derived framework to ensure that new development, as well as public projects like road and utility work, maintains the character of these areas. So these areas include the slum area, which is Simpson, Leo, Upton, McGregor, Monterey Gardens, the Pym Hill area, which would be sort of Summit, Boron, Euclid, and then the lower Pym area, which is Church Street, Pilgrim Street, Herrick, and then Queen Street between Church and Gore Street. So the Queenstown or the downtown portion of Queen Street. So the natural environment, natural heritage features include, it includes the habitat of endangered and threatened species, significant wildlife habitat. In our case, we've got the falcon and cordeer wintering areas out near the airport, falcon nesting sites on the International Bridge, and certainly a lot of wetlands, some provincially significant coastal wetlands here, again, out in the airport area, and then, a number of creeks, streams, and lakes that have been identified as fish habitat. And locally, we've also identified the Precambrian uplands area as a locally sensitive area. Again, for a variety of reasons, there are lots of water courses, lots of wetlands, and quite severe topography in a lot of the areas up there. So again, that has been identified or is proposed to be identified as a locally significant, locally sensitive area. Now, as far as the level of protections typically applied to natural heritage features, there is a bit of a range here. At the one end, you have the most restrictive range, which would be no development or site alteration is permitted within or adjacent to, and generally speaking, adjacent to is defined as 120 meters, but not necessarily. And this would apply to things like provincially significant wetlands and endangered species habitat. And then you move your way across the spectrum. For example, we do have some level of local, the ability to make local decisions. Ultimately, when it comes to natural heritage features, it's provincial policy in the province that dictates how these things and how you have to look at these things before you can develop. But we certainly have a lot of environmentally sensitive features that may, for example, we may have a creek on the north side of the road and someone's proposing something on the east side of the road and there's no culverts in between. That would be what we call intervening development. And although it might be within 120 meters, it's quite easy to see that the development wouldn't impact the natural heritage feature given the intervening development. Now, source water protection is also a very important aspect that our official plan needs to address. And really, it's the Clean Water Act 2005, which was the result of the Walkerton tragedy and the ensuing O'Connor Commission, which recommended that the province establish a multi-barrier approach to protecting our drinking water resources. We do have a Sault Ste. Marie Region Source Protection Plan, which requires protection of areas around local wellheads and the significant groundwater recharge area. So these would be our 4 local wellheads in this area. And then this would be the significant groundwater recharge area. And that's where about half of our drinking water comes from. The other half of our drinking water comes from out here in what they call the Grow Cap intake. Essentially, that the strictest protections are within 100 meters of the wellhead. Luckily for us locally, the majority of the development within 100 meters of our wellheads, not all, but the majority of that development is residential development, which isn't necessarily considered a significant threat. So certainly our city planners at the time when they put these wells in, there wasn't some thought around the type of uses that should be located near the well, but it's worked out pretty good for the Soo. So some other notable policy directions, certainly source water protection. We've talked a little bit about the Precambrian uplands. With regards to a tree bylaw, there's certainly an appetite, and this was a very common comment that we got from folks through our outreach, was that they felt that as a community, we should have a tree bylaw. However, it is recognized that the resources or personnel to implement a citywide bylaw it's substantial. It's a substantial undertaking. So with this in mind, what we're proposing is more of a scope tree bylaw that would prevent or otherwise regulate vegetation removal in environmentally sensitive areas. So this would be within wetlands, riparian zones along water courses, and along some of the significant slopes that we have in our community. Now, we want to certainly direct development away from some of our natural heritage features. We definitely want to direct development away from some of our natural hazards. Hazards include things like wildland fire, flooding, and significant slopes. Wildland fire is the new piece here, which was not addressed as part of the 1996 official plan. And in general, you can see we're not, the Sioux, it's really those areas that are high to extreme wildland fire that we need to address. Again, out in the airport area, some little pockets, in the north central part of the city, and then out in the Hiawatha area, we've also got some sort of high to extreme forest types. And again, as it relates to these hazards, we also need to recognize that climate change has and will continue to bring more extreme weather events, whether it's more frequent, intense rainstorms, more frequent and intense drought periods. So certainly flooding and wildland fire. Now, the rural area, as I spoke to, it's basically the rural area is generally the area between the urban settlement area boundary and the aggregate extraction area. So it's the area that's outside the urban settlement area, the urban serviced part of the community. Rural residential development is currently limited to 2 new lots plus the remnant. And we are at this point proposing to continue along with the prohibition of new rural estate subdivisions, with the exception of properties that have frontage upon or direct access to the water, which is quite limited within Sault Ste. Marie. But in these cases, what we're trying to do is in many cases trade some development for obtaining new access to the water. So as a condition of any development of a new waterfront property, rural waterfront estate subdivision, you would have to provide and include public access to the waterfront as part of the development. And I also note that we do not currently have sunset clauses or expiries on any of our subdivision approvals. We do have a number of estate subdivisions that currently exist that have not been fully built out as of yet. And certainly I would note that I would suggest that we had a bit of a run on rural development probably about 15 years ago that lasted for about 5 years. But for the last 10 years, certainly new rural severances, rural estate subdivisions, and rural building permits really have gone back down to represent about 10% of our total residential development. We're also proposing to permit small-scale urban agriculture, the keeping of 3 hens. And in many cases, this is happening already, but we really want to enshrine that within the official plan. And then within the official plan, we really want to support rural agriculture. And we recognize that the majority of the rural agriculture that occurs locally is small scale in nature. And they're hobby farms. But really what we want to do is specifically permit what we call agricultural related uses and on-farm diversified uses. So agricultural related uses are those that contribute to a functioning agricultural use. Things like value-added processing, retail sales of products. So an example would be if you have an apple orchard and you want to bring in a facility to make apple juice, we would like to overtly support that and not only make apple juice out of apples that are grown on your orchard, but maybe allow you to bring in some additional apples from elsewhere, and process those. And then these on-farm diversified uses are those that may not necessarily be related to the agricultural operation, but they don't detract or impact the agricultural operation. So things like agritourism, wedding venues, indoor and outdoor storage, and even contractors' yards to a certain degree. And really what these are about, this is essentially to help farmers generate additional revenue and, so to speak, get through the winter and avoid the need to sever off residential lots to generate revenue. Because once you start severing residential lots, not only are you taking away from your agricultural acreage, you're also introducing a sensitive use to the area that can have the effect of sterilizing the land around it. And if there are livestock facilities, it can actually not only take away from your acreage, but you could be creating a situation where you no longer have the ability to expand that livestock operation because of the new sensitive uses that have been created around you. And certainly the OMAFRA's, or the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, has minimum distance separation guidelines that were not in place in 1996, and we have to implement those. So we would specifically implement those minimum distance separation criteria between livestock uses and sensitive uses and vice versa. Okay, so on the implementation side, public participation in the planning process, it's an extremely valuable and extremely important part of what we do. For site-specific or area-specific Planning Act applications, in addition to the mailed notices that we currently provide, we are proposing as a new requirement that a sign be posted on the property. And that's a bit of a change from where we're at now. Right now, we send out public notice to everybody that's within 120 meters, and then we put an ad in the Sioux Star. But what we found is, what if you're 200 meters away? You may not have gotten a public notice, but there's a pretty good chance that if you're in that neighborhood, you've driven by that property. So we feel that a sign would be a very effective way of helping to advertise that there is a Planning Act application on this property. And we will continue to, and again, enshrine in the official plan the requirement for a neighborhood meeting. We've been doing that for the last, I'd say, 2 years. Not so much in person lately, but certainly they've worked very well. And we will also put in place some policies that require an alternative type of meeting if in-person gatherings are not permitted. So one example, in the last year or so, we've been having applicants send out a letter to neighbors outlining what the project is all about, giving our contact info as well as the developer's contact info, so that they have an understanding of what's going on before the neighbors hear it from the city. Now, for community-wide or policy amendments, which usually it's municipal staff that bring those to council, we'll continue to, first step, provide council with the informational report. Then once we've done that, proceed with a public notice for one or more public outreach meetings or neighborhood meetings. And then once those neighborhood meetings are done, we would give the formal public notice of the council meeting. So it's almost a sort of a two-stage notice, if you will. Now, as far as implementation, I mean, there's a wide, and the background report goes into a lot of details of the various Planning Act tools that are available to municipalities to achieve a variety of goals. One of the more discussed sort of Planning Act tools would be community improvement plans, which is a way that you can incentivize a certain type of development. So right now we've got 3 existing CIPs. The rental housing CIP, which expires in March and has been very successful. And then certainly another successful CIP has been our downtown CIP. And I should note the funding available for the building improvement grants in the downtown CIP has been completely used up. But we can certainly still approve tax rebate grant for major new developments. And I should note that both the rental housing and downtown CIPs are currently under review and may be extended subject to council's approval. I believe the rental housing CIP expires in March. Okay, and then some potential CIP initiatives and goals. This slide just kind of outlines some of the potential initiatives and goals that the OP is proposing. Again, they need to be strategically aimed. They need to address a community need and achieve a significant public good. Some examples of some things that at this point we've identified, and this is certainly up for greater discussion, improvements to private and public lands, projects that enhance conservation and efficient use of energy, the provision of affordable housing units. That's one where you can use a CIP to incentivize more affordable units. In supporting the continued growth of Sioux College and Algoma University, there is also the ability and potential to incentivize additional rental units in close proximity to those institutions. And then the development and redevelopment of properties in older areas of the community where assessment growth may be low or where building stock is deemed beyond its useful life. So that concludes the presentation that we had planned. So again, at the outset, I said, please stay connected. There are ample opportunities for community engagement and ample opportunities for people to give us input and feedback on what we're proposing. You can visit us on the website, shapethesioux.ca. You can email us, phone us, and then you can also connect with us through our various social media accounts. So with that, Madam Acting Mayor, thank you very much, and we can open the floor to any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Mr. Tenazzo. Take a deep breath. That was a very good presentation, a lot of information. So thank you for your hard work, your whole team's work. Look at you smiling. It's a lot of good information. I just want to emphasize again, we have a number of new individuals, new families that have moved to Sault Ste. Marie. And we also obviously have many existing community members. Please, I emphasize, please take Mr. Tenazzo's invite. And you still have time to give us your feedback. He did outline several ways that you can contact us. I'm under the impression, will your presentation, Mr. Tenazzo, will be on the city website for anyone that wants to review it again?
Yes, Madam Acting Mayor, we can put this on the city website. It'll also be available on shapethesioux.ca, which is also where you can go to get a copy of that background report. And if you don't want to print or view 250 pages on your screen, we can make hard copies available too.
Okay, thank you. And I'm happy to say that going through your presentation and going back through the background report, there's a few projects that we've already been currently working on. And as one example, last Monday at our last council meeting, we talked about trees. So that's a positive. There's a lot of good work that's already taking place that you mentioned tonight. And there's still a lot more room for some change. Having said that, I started a list of different councillors, and I saw Councillor Christian first, then I saw Councillor Shoemaker, and then Councillor Hilsinger. Before I pass on, I have Councillor Venezuela, and I have Councillor Dufour. I see also Councillor Nero, Councillor Bruni, and that's who I see so far. Having said that, Councillor Christian, we'll start with you with questions.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Peter, to reiterate, good presentation, a lot of information. I know this is the planning stage, so there's a long way to go. Councillor Hollingsworth asked one of my questions, and that was the availability of the report. I mean, I think the report is pretty self-explanatory. I don't want to delve into too many hypotheticals. I get the report in its entirety. I do have one question though, and it's a minor issue, but it stood out to me. Early in the presentation, you were showing where we currently are in employment numbers for different sectors, and then there was a projection for 2036. And there was a separate area for professional, scientific, and technical that I didn't see on the left side of the page. And I think there was roughly 1,700 jobs being projected. Is this something that's plugged in because it's a societal change we expect, or what leads us to 1,700 jobs in this subset within the general population?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, when the projections were done by Metro Economics, they used their own modeling to create these, and I think they used provincial statistics.
I was afraid of that.
And that's much of it, but I think there's also, as it relates to health and social services, for example, and again, the entire province is aging, the baby boomers are aging, but we're aging at a greater rate. So I think there was some local massaging of those numbers, but generally speaking, this would be in line with sort of job growth within the province.
Yeah. Listen, excellent report. that response is what I was afraid of. It's simply a projection. Although I don't disagree with the overall numbers. I just find that unusual to plug that in and have such a high number for a population of 70 or 80,000 people. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, if that's all, Councillor Christian, Councillor Shoemaker, Matt?
Yes, thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Number of questions, Peter. Thanks for the good presentation. First off, I'm just going to pull them up here. I'd written the bunch down. So this isn't specifically on the presentation, but in the documents, there was a chart with various feedback summaries that you had prepared. And someone submitted a suggestion on incentivizing deconstruction as opposed to demolition. And I was just wondering if you could explain the difference between those two things.
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councilor Shoemaker. So deconstruction would be physically taking a building apart, brick by brick, board by board, whereas demolition would be going in with a wrecking ball. So deconstruction would be taking it apart piece by piece and then repurposing some of those materials, whereas demolition would be simply going in with a wrecking ball and hauling it off to the landfill.
Okay. I could see value to both of those things. Obviously, if you're looking to repurpose the materials, deconstruction seems like a better option. If you're looking to clear a zone relatively quick for a rebuild, demolition obviously would be the preferred option. Does the city, have a position? Obviously, the feedback submitted was that we should prefer deconstruction as opposed to demolition, but do we care, for lack of a better term, whether someone demolishes or deconstructs a building?
Through you, Acting Mayor, I don't know that at this point we have a position. Certainly that's open to further discussion. I think from an environmental and a sustainable standpoint, deconstruction is always preferred, but within the site-specific timeframes, cost, it's not always the most time-effective or cost-effective way to do it. So at this point, we don't have a position.
So thanks, I appreciate that. If it's preferred, is there something we can do to try and encourage it as opposed to demolition? Or something we're already doing?
I'm not, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I'm not aware of any incentives that we might have in place currently. Again, it's something that we'd really have to look at because you can prefer one over the other, but ultimately deconstruction might not fit with the overall project, the time frame, the costs. So you really have to look at these things on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I guess it's worth considering. I'm not sure if this is an official plan issue or more of just a policy implementation issue, but I guess it would be worth considering if someone is looking to deconstruct, whether that's something we can, incentivize them to do if it is, in fact, better for the built environment and probably the natural environment as well.
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting, there's nothing stopping us from, let's say, using the CIP or Community Improvement Plan framework to incentivize deconstruction, for example.
And since you mentioned the CIP, you mentioned that our rental housing CIP is coming up for expiration in March, I think you said. Are we intending, or is the recommendation going to be to renew it for additional time, or is this expected to be the end?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I think the Planning Director, Mr. McConnell, is going to answer this question.
Thank you. Actually, the existing CIP, which provides an incentive for any form of rental housing, provided you're building more than 4 units, will end in September. So we do have some time. We are looking at fine-tuning that a bit and then bringing it back to council for consideration. But that hasn't gone through a staff evaluation yet, which is going to happen over the next few months.
Okay, I guess the the concern I had would be if someone's looking to build apartment units now, do they have to rush in to get their applications in prior to, I thought I heard March, but now you're saying September. So it sounds to me like that's not the case.
Well, people are aware that the program as it's currently designed will come to an end in September, and it would take a decision of council to extend that.
So
So
better to get the applications in now.
we will be reporting to council, but yes, if someone is planning on doing something, getting the applications in is always a good plan. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. You talk, I think it was on slide 17, about 3 possible incentives for affordable housing. You talk about a per door grant versus a tax grant versus waiving an application fee. I suspect a tax grant would be something along the lines of a CIP, as you know, but can you explain the other 2 options there in a bit more depth?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, Mr. McConnell, I believe you were going to answer that one.
Certainly, thanks. Through you, Madam Acting Mayor. In order to provide any sort of a grant, it would have to go through a community improvement plan. That's really the only way. It's is to be consistent with the Planning Act legislation and Municipal Act legislation. So whether the decision was made to, because what we're saying, we're either providing a rebate to someone on their taxes, or we're providing a rebate to someone on their cost of their approval fees, or just giving somebody an outright grant, such as we have done for some of the downtown programs. That would have to go through a community improvement plan. So those are simply options. There's been no decisions made to move forward with that at this time.
Okay, so those are, would the direction in that case have to come from council? I realize ultimately you need council approval for the direction you're seeking, but are you seeking council direction to choose one of those avenues, or will it be something that's discussed and brought forward internally?
Either way, we'll get a report to you. Generally the way these things develop is that they come forward from staff. And we have not had an opportunity, as I say, to sit down and evaluate what all of the options are. I think Mr. Tanaza was just suggesting these as some of the options that other municipalities have done moving forward to try to encourage more housing. I would like to say, that our rental housing program has been successful. We have built over 300 units under that program so far. And that is something that, will be part of the evaluation as to whether or not we want to continue that.
Thank you. That's appreciated. I think in the same slide or in the same vicinity of the report, you talk about reduced development standards. Could you explain what that means? I'm suspecting that doesn't mean reduced building standards, but what does it entail?
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. So by reduced development standards, no. The building code is still the building code, and that will still apply. By reduced development standards, what we mean is maybe a reduction in the required parking. When you're looking at the adaptive reuse of a building, maybe you're looking at an increased scope of permitted uses, ways that you recognize, in terms of adaptive reuse of existing buildings, ways that you recognize that the existing building is there, that it exists, and it exists the way that it exists. As far as things like reduced development standards for affordable housing, I think the reduced required parking would be a really good example of a possible reduced development standard.
In terms of reduced parking, this is one that is raised quite often, especially with respect to redevelopment of downtown properties. Which I think were mostly developed before minimum parking standards came into existence. Are the minimum parking standards that we've got in the community, are they set by the municipality, or are they provincially mandated, or is there some provincial bandwidth within which we have to operate?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor. So parking that's a local decision. Our minimum parking requirements were essentially developed within a bandwidth of rule of thumb, sort of rule of thumb ratios that we've searched out and obtained. Now, with all of that in mind, we do have, as you said, as a matter of right now, reduce parking standards if you're developing something in the downtown, reduce parking requirements based on square footage. And then we have some other sort of call them grandfathering in type provisions, where if you're providing a new use in existing building, you don't have to provide any new parking. But we are committed going forward. One of the comments that we've received from another number of people is that our parking requirements are actually too high. And we've seen this quite recently with some of our out of town developers. So as you know, at the conclusion of the official plan review, we are committed to reviewing our current parking requirements with an eye towards trying to reduce them where appropriate.
I think of one example. There was that building next to the old Orzetti Furniture on right across from the GFL Memorial Gardens that burned down some time ago. It's currently being used for a parking lot. But if someone wanted to redevelop that in between the existing space, kind of wall to wall redevelopment, would we be able to waive, the parking requirement altogether to allow it to be developed kind of in the way it was previously?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, unfortunately, Councillor Shoemaker, I'd have to review the specific regulations. We certainly have provisions in there that would have the effect of significantly reducing that parking, but I see Mr. McConnell has his hand up. You might have a more specific answer.
That's an excellent example, Councillor Shoemaker. And in that case, if in that case the building was damaged by fire and was demolished, or someone just wanted to demolish it, he could build that same building back without providing any additional parking. And we do have, as Mr. Tenauza mentioned, we already do have reduced parking requirements for new builds in the downtown. But basically, if he just wanted to put the building back the way it was, or a better example would be a similarly sized building, he would not have to provide any additional parking.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Moving off of that point for a little bit, you talk about something of a shortfall of, I think, commercial space, but what seems to be perhaps an overabundance of industrial space, if I'm reading the summary correctly. And you say we can make up for some of the shortfall in the commercial space by readapting or using some of the commercial space to compensate for it. Now, that raises the question of compatibility of uses or compatibility of neighboring uses, and does it raise the specter of conflicting uses if you're using what is adjacent to an industrial operation for say a commercial operation?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's a great question. I kind of glanced over it, but when you really look at the specifics of the areas that we're proposing this sort of hybrid designation, it's really the strip malls on the west side of Black Road, again, some lighter industrial development or medium industrial development on the south side of Second Line. When you look at that, and certainly the zones will have to be designed, but I don't know that you're going to have an issue because you're really putting together lighter industrial uses and heavier commercial uses. And I'm not, I think when it's designed, it'll be designed in a manner that you don't have those compatibility issues, so that you're not putting a doctor's office beside a machine shop, for example. I don't know if either of those uses would necessarily be permitted in that designation, but certainly that's going to be the key towards, making that an appropriate land use designation.
Okay, so that it won't be permitted to be incompatible. Or at least you won't recommend it. You won't recommend it.
Correct. It would have to be designed to be compatible in a sense. The zones themselves.
The background report, I think it's on page 13, talks about this is permitted office space outside the downtown, essentially a doubling of the permitted office space outside the downtown area. So, I mean, I don't pretend to speak for the rest of council, but I think that it's been clear we want to see redevelopment or reinvigoration of our downtown. So I wonder if that is contrary to that vision, or maybe you've got a reason why you would recommend it.
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I'll turn this over to Mr. Steve Turkle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yeah, as Peter mentioned earlier in his presentation, one of the things that we're looking at is a renewed downtown CIP. And one of the things that we're investigating is sort of redefining sort of the nature of the downtown. And obviously, office spaces is critical to the downtown, but we're also, through understanding other cities and best practices, realizing that there are other important uses that we want to encourage in the downtown that really creates that vibrancy. And it's important to note that with the official plan going forward, major office space is still, from policy direction, we're going to be encouraging major office space to be located in the downtown. With the flexibility in the policy as it's written, we really wanted to create that opportunity to repurpose vacant spaces in other parts of the community, as well as distribute other types of office spaces like medical uses or other kind of institutional type office uses throughout the community. So they're equitably distributed throughout the community. So office space is still an important component of our downtown, but definitely as we move forward, we definitely want to see other uses embraced and enhanced in the downtown, like food and beverages, other types of retail, trying to get those uses that really create activity in the evening hours and on the weekends as well.
Okay. I think I think that there's much value to having, you know, additional uses, and I would say especially residential ones, because it brings people down, as you say, beyond the 5 o'clock hour. I wonder if we're taking one step forward and 2 steps back there. So you know, you guys are the planners. I don't. You know, I trust that there's good planning principles behind this, but I do have that question in my mind as to whether or not this is putting us further behind where we want to be. If we can't do those things that you're describing, in addition to requiring office space downtown.
That's a good point, Councillor Shoemaker. I'm just being leery of the other councillors that have questions. So you made a good point there. Can just continue on with your other questions, please?
Yeah, okay. Thanks. So you talk about redevelopment of older residential areas, and is there or would there be the possibility in accord with that principle, if someone wanted to, say, take an entire city block of substantially derelict properties? I could think of at least a couple of them in the neighborhoods downtown that have what we would call, or I think what you would call, broken teeth syndrome, or where there's multiple vacant gaps and then a number of derelict properties beyond that. Would the official plan or the background document allow for the, you know, clearing of an entire area of, say, single detached or low density residential to put up, you know, high density or medium density residential in the area? Would that be encouraged? Would that be permitted?
It sounds like, sorry, it sounds like what you're saying, what they did in Niagara on the Lake and also in Detroit, they've done this type of practice. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yeah, absolutely. An official plan, the current official plan, wouldn't stop something like that from happening. We encourage mixed use neighborhoods. We encourage, you know, residential intensification. That what you're describing in many respects is, well, it is a form of residential intensification. We certainly wouldn't discourage that, and the official plan certainly wouldn't preclude that from happening.
Okay. And if we wanted to encourage it from happening, it sounds like there are, Mr. McConnell, did you have something to add to that? I think I saw your hand go up there.
Councilor Shoemaker, I just wanted to note, in addition to Mr. Snazzo's comments, yes, there's nothing in the official plan to prohibit that. The official plan certainly, has created a new downtown category, and we're very encouraging of more residential development. As a matter of fact, we have a community improvement plan in place to do just that. Depending on the location of it, though, there is an approval process involved. If someone went in and they wanted to buy a bunch of houses on Wellington Street or Albert Street and bulldoze them, they would likely require rezoning. So there would be an approval process involved in there that council would be involved with. I just didn't want people to think that it was as of right in all locations.
Right, but so it would require rezoning potentially, but it would be in conformity with the official plan.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it. There is, I think you said this was your favorite map, Peter, so I'm going to ask you a question about it. The one about the parks within an 800-meter, I think, walking distance it was. There was a number of gaps, I think more so in the downtown area than elsewhere. And they didn't look like major gaps, but there were pockets of gaps here and there. Does the official plan encourage the development? I mean, I suspect it tries to control only private development as opposed to public development more so. But is there anything in there that would require, say, if a private developer wanted to do a project in the downtown area where there was such a gap that they could be, coerced or required to develop parkland in that area?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor. So that's there's a few layers to this answer. First and foremost, yes, the Planning Act, our official plan, depending on the nature of development, there is the ability to collect either parkland land or cash in lieu of parkland. So for example, if there was a gap and somebody was proposing a development where we could get parkland or cash in lieu of parkland, we would certainly look at that map and say, okay, there's a gap, let's get parkland. This area is well serviced. In relation to the development that's being proposed, this area will continue to be well serviced by the existing park. So let's take the cash and potentially put it back in that particular park, or have it just go into the, the Parkland Dedication Reserve Fund. But the other part to that, and I should also note that we will have a high level policy in our official plan that encourages the community to look at these gaps and try to fill in these gaps however is most appropriate, whether that's a new park, a new PXO, a catwalk, something of that nature. Now, the last part to that is that as it stands now, there are a lot of development applications that council approves where we could be collecting either parkland or cash in lieu of parkland, but we don't currently. And what we're proposing with the new official plan is that we look at that further and we develop a parkland dedication bylaw. So right now as a community, we collect parkland, either parkland or cash two ways. If somebody does a severance or a consent through the Committee of Adjustment, we're collecting 5% cash in lieu of for residential, 2% cash in lieu of for other types of uses. And then we also collect them as part of draft plans of subdivisions. But the legislation actually also allows us to collect them on various residential intensification projects. So if you have a property that's zoned for a triplex and somebody comes in and says, I want to build 12 units on this lot, we're leaving that money on the table at this point in time, so to speak. So there is an opportunity to generate some more parkland revenue by utilizing those tools to their fullest extent.
And is that something that'll be specifically in the official plan, or it'll come as an accompanying document to the official plan?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I think the policies in the proposed official plan will underwrite and support doing a little bit more legwork in order to potentially make that happen if council decides that they want to go in that direction.
Okay, thanks for that. You had mentioned that
Shoemaker?
yes.
Sorry, Councilor Shoemaker. Again, you have excellent questions. I've just been very understanding of your other fellow council members. Would you be interested in ask one more question, then give your other council members a chance and then come back to you?
I'd be happy to, although I suspect my next one is multi-layered. So I'll ask it, and after that, I'll pass the baton, provided my follow-ups can be answered there.
Okay.
Peter, with respect to rural subdivisions only being approved where there's waterfront, could there be reconsideration of that? Like I personally, I suspect that there's additional people moving up here because of COVID or whatever the case might be, that want to live kind of in nature. And I know you said there's a number of undeveloped rural approved plans of subdivision, but if we wanted to go beyond that, and council wanted to say specifically that, no, we want to continue to approve rural subdivisions, why wouldn't we, or why couldn't we do that? Or why would you recommend against that?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I guess at its highest level, the rural subdivision sort of represents that urban sprawl that we're trying to avoid and minimize the best we can. Now, we certainly recognize that there is a rural, whether it's a rural severance or a rural subdivision market that exists out there, and there's people that want to live in this type of neighborhood. I think generally speaking, it is a local decision as to whether we want to permit rural estate subdivisions or not, but we have to adhere to provincial policy, which states that rural residential development shall be limited in nature. And how you define limited in nature within the local context, right now we've defined it by saying no rural estate subdivisions, because again, there are a number of these rural lots that exist, rural estate lots that exist that have been undeveloped. And then we further define it by saying you can do 2 severances plus the remnant or remaining portion of the property. So that's how we've currently defined limited rural residential development. I think there could potentially be some room to allow additional rural estate subdivisions, but we'd have to keep in mind that it would have to be limited in nature. And my sense of rural estate subdivisions is they're, in comparison to urban subdivisions, they're relatively easy for a developer to put together, in that the upfront costs of a rural estate subdivision aren't the same as a service subdivision. So you have to be really careful in that if you permit one, it really sets precedents and it opens up the door for a lot of rural properties that we have in our rural area that could fairly easily support rural estate subdivision development. And then at that point, you're getting into sprawl.
And I see Don McCollin has a comment. Mr. McCollin.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Just a little bit of history, and I will be short on this, but we went through a phase where, and Mr. Towser pointed out, we were approving a lot of real estate subdivisions. Many of them were not getting built. Some of them are still being built out. We also, like from simply a taxation viewpoint, there was a taxation element to this, there was a fairness element to this, was that when we build real estate subdivisions, the city then has to maintain the roads and provide services out there to very low density uses. So from a financial viewpoint, that's a loss. And we took the position, and the council at the time agreed to us. They said, and we want to be fair to everybody. So we'll give everybody, provided your lot's big enough, an opportunity to create 2 more lots. And that was all on existing services. Those are roads that we're already maintaining. Those are places we're already providing services. The school bus is already driving down the road. And that was the thinking behind it at the time. So we said, we're going to be fiscally responsible, and we're going to be fair to everybody. If you've got a big enough lot, you get it. That's it. That was the rules in effect. And that's how we got to the policy that we're at today.
Thank you.
Okay. Just on that point there, I mean, this is part of what I suspected would be the back and forth here. If, for example, there's swaths of land, say out on Allenside Road or Goulet Avenue or whatever the case might be, that are already being maintained, I fail to see how adding some density to those areas by approving a plan of subdivision on, big empty portions of land, but where, garbage trucks already go by and plows already go by, is it doesn't create more efficiency. It seems to me it would create more efficiency.
We certainly could look at that. I can tell you that at the time, we weren't getting a lot of those types of developments. The types of developments where we've got like 80 or 100 acres of land and we're going to build new roads. But certainly, yeah, we could go back and look at that.
I mean, from my perspective, that's what I think. That's where I think that the policy that's proposed, which is to only allow new rural subdivisions where there's waterfront or waterfront access, is too rigid. So I'd mentioned Councillor Hollingsworth had asked me if I had any motions, and this is where I said I wasn't sure. I'd like to see it not be quite that tight. You know, I'd like to see the possibility of expanding here and there where services are already being provided, and to add an incremental increase or a fractional change, it, you know, makes some sense.
Sorry, go ahead, Don, and then I just want to make a comment. Go ahead, Mr.
I was going to say that's certainly something we can look at before we finalize this document. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll bring it back to council.
Okay, fine. Councillor Shoemaker, as we talked about, this is discussion tonight. This is different opinions. If there's a resolution, we would talk about that separately. At this time, I would like to give fellow councillors a chance to ask their questions. Councillor Shoemaker, if you have any more questions, can we link back to you towards the end?
Yeah, I just want to ask Malcolm on that procedural question. If that's, I realize this is for information, but I don't want to leave here without making direction clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, we will be taking all your input that you're giving us, all of Councillor's input tonight. It does concern the background document, so it's not concerning the draft official plan. So we see this as just additional input on that helps inform us as we direct the drafting of the official plan. The official plan will go out, the draft official plan will go out for further community input and then be considered by council. It's through that consideration process that if in the end what comes to you is you have concerns with it, that's where you would have the opportunity to action something. So we've certainly heard what you've said, your opinion concerning the rural estate subdivisions. You've noted a couple of things and staff has noted that those are things we can look into, and we will.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. So Councillor Shoemaker, I'm just going to put you on pause for now, and we will link back. If you do have any more questions, comments will be reserved towards the end. I'd like to move on to Councillor Hilsinger, please. Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you. Okay. Really great to see that map with all of the cycling lane improvements, and I feel really proud to have worked on that over the years with a number of you. And I just want to confirm that additional infrastructure, that's going to be handled through that new active transportation plan. So we know that we recognize we want to build on that, and that's happening through that. Okay, super. Question or just a comment actually about, you mentioned about public notice and setting up a different system and putting signs and all of that. And I think we think these days about meeting in person, and we don't meet in person because of COVID, but perhaps we've learned something from this, and where we could, you know, virtual meetings facilitate accessibility for people. You know, can deal with other things. So perhaps you could consider that in how you rewrite that idea. Is green space synonymous with park spaces in the definitions that you all think about?
Is that to Mr. Tomaso?
Yeah. Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, not necessarily. I think and maybe my colleagues may have a different take. I think when we think about green space, we think about undeveloped land. Green space can be it can be a public park. It can also be privately held. So for example, we have an open space land use designation that has been applied to some privately held properties. So for us, I think green space is a little bit more than just park space.
Park space. Okay. Okay. And you talked earlier about community parks and adding parks. We covered the parking. I think you all have heard loud and clear the concerns by many about how we can do parking differently. You talked about the complete neighborhood and the 15-minute neighborhood and so on. I understand that that's a focus. There's one of the comments that came from someone in the public, specific regulations for automobile-oriented uses. And your recommendation or the recommendation is that we don't do that. Why? There is no reasoning behind that. It just says we don't recommend it. Can you explain why you've said that?
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, that's a really good question and a really hard question to answer. I don't know if we're just suggesting that we don't do that or we don't do that here. That's a significant departure and a significant change from where we are as a community right now. And at this point, we don't feel that it would be appropriate to put those types of policies in place that would automatically, for example, say, well, just because you're a garage or just because you have a drive-through, you can't locate in these certain areas. I think we would look at it from a more of a technical side and say, if you're on a corner, are your access is going to be appropriate? Are you going to have adequate stack spaces that won't back out onto the street? I think we would take a more technical approach to that rather than, a philosophical approach to say that if you're an automobile oriented use, you can't locate here.
So that doesn't tell me, and I'm conscious of time and I know other people have questions for sure, but that doesn't tell me why you've made that decision. It just tells me that you feel that we shouldn't, and I'll leave it at there. I think that we need to start thinking about doing some of these things that we've never done here in this city before. And I'm going to bring us to another one now, which was what you mentioned about the tree bylaw. And you said we feel that we can do a scope tree bylaw, if I'm remembering the wording correctly. But then you said the resources that are required to actually create and enforce a tree bylaw, it's just too much for us. And I ask again, why is it too much? Because if there's one thing I've learned from my time, the 3.5 years I've been here so far, is what gets prioritized gets funded. And if we want to make significant changes to this community and we want to be the place that people want to move to, those are the kinds of radical, if you will, in a way, in a good way, radical decisions that can significantly change what our community looks like and what our community feels like and so on. So I've said that, and you'll take that back in the notes. When we did the cultural or the future Sault Ste. Marie plan, we forecasted a population by 2037 of 100,000 people. Your numbers, I think, was 83,000 and a bit. That 100,000 anticipated, I want to say, going back a few years, 8,000 to 10,000 out of town students that when they live here 8 to 12 months out of a year, regardless of whether they decide to stay in Sault Ste. Marie or not, they are like our population, and they're very valuable in that way. And we certainly want to encourage that. So how did that get thought about in terms of our need for you spoke a little bit to the housing for students and so on, but there's a big difference between 83,000 and 90 or 92 or 95,000. So could you comment on that, please?
Through you, sorry. I think Mr. McConnell wants to answer this one.
If I may, Madam Acting Mayor, the number that was created by the future Sault Ste. Marie was not a projection. It was more of a target. They were talking at the time as what would we like to get to, and then how can we get there? And that, I forget whether it was actually ended up being 90 or was it 100,000, but it was a target. What we're saying is that's very useful, and I don't dismiss that at all. I mean, that's a great target for us to work towards. But in an official plan sense, a lot of people are making a lot of decisions based on what you're putting in there. So we're designing our road system, we're designing our sewer systems to make sure that we're good at 83,000, not that we're good at 100,000 in the next 15 years. That's basically the difference. We're looking and we're saying forget ferrochrome, even if we get no outside major manufacturing uses come here or other major businesses come here, based on just the aging of the population and the retirements and the changes to the types of services we're going to require, we should go up by about 10,000 people over the next 15 years. And that's how that was determined. Does that answer your question at all?
Oh, I appreciate that. And I understood that, Mr. McConnell. What I'm saying is if we haven't, perhaps it makes no difference. Okay. But if we haven't anticipated, and we've seen the success that Sioux College and Algoma has had in the last couple of years in attracting new students. And so if we're, I don't know what their plan, well, I know some of what their plans are, but, that could have a significant impact on our housing need, student housing need and so on. And so I'll just leave that in the thoughts.
Actually, Councillor Hilsinger, that's a very good point. If I may say, since COVID, a lot of communities in Canada and also the United States have got caught. They have received a lot of migration out of urban centers to other areas, and they've gotten caught in the roads, not enough transportation. And I appreciate what you're saying, 83,000, 100,000. I agree with you, Councillor Hilsinger. We could be getting caught if we're not watching our population closely, just like other communities have. So that's a good point. Thank you.
Thanks. One of the notes says about arts and culture being focused on the downtown. And I just wanted to share this thought with you. While I completely support that, and we all know that I'm really, really passionate about culture and arts and heritage. But I want us to remember that nature has its own arts and culture as well. And I don't want us to forget about, we live in, well, I like to say it's one of the most beautiful areas, if not the most beautiful area in Canada. And to have that, I don't know, like that vision that arts and culture has to be in this certain place. And certainly we have a lot by thinking about it and by dedicating certain resources and plans towards arts, culture, and heritage in the downtown. It makes a lot of sense, but I don't want us to think that other neat kinds of projects or other ways of thinking about it would prohibit arts and culture from being promoted to be not necessarily in downtown, and especially where nature is. Okay. Great. I love hearing about the parkland dedication bylaws and cash and lieu of park and all that. We got to get it together on that. From the prospect of beautification, with the changes that you're suggesting right now, and I realize it's not signed, sealed, and delivered, but from the changes that you're suggesting right now or are planning for right now, and on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we now on a beautification scale, with 10 being amazing, okay, and 1 being not so great? Where do you think we are now, and how will these policies and this new official plan affect beautification?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, Mr. Turco, I think you'll take that question.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger. I guess there's 2 ways that maybe this can be addressed. One is the actions and initiatives that the city itself takes in terms of its public space improvements, and I would include our streets on that. And definitely over the last couple of years, we've set a really strong precedent in the downtown in terms of beautifying our streets. The other part to this, to add on to that is, and something that you're involved in as well, is the active transportation plan. And part of that exercise will be to develop a series of guidelines, which would be considered complete street guidelines. And as part of that, it is essentially looking at how the space within the road right-of-way can be allocated to different forms of transportation, but also to other mechanisms that can help with traffic calming, landscaping, being part of that. So there's the things that the city can do to add to beautification, but there's also the role that the private sector can do to beautify individual sites, redevelopment sites. So as Mr. Tenazzo mentioned, one of these sort of implementing documents that we hope to move forward, we actually have currently a sustainable site plan guidelines. We hope to review that guideline to essentially advise future developments on how to create more aesthetically pleasing developments throughout the community. So developments like bigger box retail or drive-through restaurants, things like that. How can we add beautification elements like landscaping, sidewalks, things like that to individual developments to make them more aesthetically pleasing?
Okay. I just like to think about things in sort of like goals or whatever. And if we're at a 5, how do we get to an 8 or a 9? And what role does the official plan, or a 10? What role does the official plan have in impacting that? So I have 2 more things. One is, so is there any way that an official plan can help support certain segments of economic development like tourism? And I ask that question because, you know, when it comes to like manufacturing or commercial retail and so on, we can see how what we're trying to do is make space for people to start new things and make it make sense and in this new way of developing. But from as one example, from a tourism perspective, is there anything the official plan can do to that you say right now or could be considered that would support more support for tourism?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I think a lot of those things are ingrained in the urban design section and the urban design and mobility section. So to make it a more welcoming, beautiful community, I think, you know, it's not only for residents, but it's also for people that are coming to visit. So I think a lot of that stuff, I don't want to say it's second nature, but I think it's ingrained within the official plan without specifically saying this is for tourism purposes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, just, you know, as we move forward, and urban design is a strong theme that is embedded and weaved throughout the official plan. Like Peter had mentioned earlier, you know, to attract new people to Sault Ste. Marie, whether it's tourists or people that want to set up, you know, either a new job or move here for schooling, we're competing with other municipalities across North America. And one of the things that we can do is really set a really good example of good urban design. So making our spaces, our public spaces, making our developments really stand out. And when people come to Sault Ste. Marie, it's really unique. It's something that people talk about, and that message gets out there that we're a beautiful community and people want to move to it.
And so it's like raising the bar, right? The official plan helps to raise the bar. The last thing, and I'm going to put you on the spot, and I appreciate if you don't want to answer this question right now, go on, and maybe you want to answer it before the end. I would be curious to know from Mr. Tenazzo and Mr. Turco and Mr. McConnell, what would be 2 or 3 words you would use to describe what our community would look like in 5 years after the formalized official plan is put in place? What's going to be, what are 3 words that come to mind? And you can park that if that's too much of on the spot for you, and we can move on.
Can I answer that, Madam Acting Mayor?
Absolutely. All 3.
A better quality of life. That's what does it. You know, whether it's more jobs, more housing, affordable housing, better amenities, just as you put it on the sort of beautification level, a better quality of life. If it works for us, it works for everybody else. And that's our best form of economic development.
Thanks, Don. Thanks,
Peter and Steve, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I don't know if it's through you, Madam Acting Mayor. It's to sort of build upon what Don said, and I put it in simplest terms, but I'd like to see Sault Ste. Marie being heralded as one of these sort of cool places to be in 5 years. That at a provincial or even a national level, people are talking about Sault Ste. Marie in the same breath that they're talking about some of these other wonderful places that we've heard about, like Guelph and Toronto or Niagara on the Lake. I'd like to hear us in the same conversation.
Good. Steve?
Yeah, and I was just going to say something very similar, to be recognized as sort of a destination, like somewhere where we compete strongly with other vibrant communities. And I think one of the things we talked a little bit about was this idea of complete neighborhoods. So being recognized as a city of neighborhoods. So doesn't matter which area of town you live in, you have access to a variety of houses, you have access to a variety of different commercial institutional uses. and a community where you don't necessarily have to get in a car to enjoy these things. So you can walk or ride your bike or get around the community easily and efficiently.
Awesome. That's really cool. Let's go get it. Let's go get it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hilsing. Is that all for your questions? Okay. Maybe we can challenge the rest of the councillors for 3 words as the meeting goes on. It's brought to my attention that Councillor Christian needs to leave at 6:45. Do you have any other questions, Councillor Christian, at this time? Otherwise, I will go on to Councillor Benson. Well, Ellen? Councillor Christian? No? Okay. I have to apologize. I do have a speech impediment, Councillor Benjamin. I have a hard time seeing these, so I apologize. But go ahead with your questions.
Just call me LVA.
That's even better.
Yeah. I stuttered for 10 years and went to speech therapy, so I totally understand
Yeah, that was
why I got into acting. So my question is about housing. And if we go to page 76 in the backgrounder, housing acceptability. And I want to go to page 77, the proportion of households who are in core housing need, which you see 35% and 30% is in that downtown core. Then if you go into proportion of households who live in unaffordable housing, so that's people that are paying more than a third of their income to housing, we are in that same area. We've got 44% and 49%. And then if you go into inadequate housing, so that would be housing that is, not up to standards. It could be, and Councillor Dufour and I field calls on this quite often. The higher percentages are again in that area. So my question is, in looking at this official plan, while you have these reports and the maps and you identify the issue, I'm not seeing any solutions or any recommendations. So could you please comment on that?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Vezo-Allen, I'll take the first part of the answer, and then I think the second part may relate to potential CIP incentives that could go in this area. So I'll let Dawn answer that. I think when you look at the new downtown land use designation, when you look at, again, those overarching themes of the official plan, we want the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. We want, we've got various incentives that are out there, not monetary incentives, but let's call them reduced development standards, so to speak, not with respect to, is it at, with the building code, but reduce parking, reduce setbacks. We've got a lot of various sort of administrative incentives, if you will, or development incentives that are aimed at trying to sort of reinvigorate some of these areas. So I think at its core, at a very high level, the official plan should lend itself well to facilitating the adaptive reuse and rehabilitation of these areas. And then also on the CIP stand, we certainly have made some recommendations there, which I can turn over to Mr. McConnell.
Thanks, Peter. Just sort of, I think it's important when we're talking about housing affordability and even housing standards, it's important to keep in mind that the provincial government is the big player here. I mean, there certainly is a role for the municipality. We've done a number of things over the last few years. I see our role as being more on supporting the supply side. So in the last few years, like we've changed our zoning regulations. We now allow everyone to have a second unit, to have an accessory unit on your property. We do have, I mentioned earlier, incentive programs for creating new rental housing. That same incentive, or not that same incentive program, but a different incentive program applies directly to the downtown. But the focus is more on increasing the supply. With regards to going back and rehabbing some of the older buildings, we have inquired with the province, and we did report on this to council 2 or 3 years ago, because we did inquire on the province to see, is there any funding available whatsoever for a community improvement plan that would allow us to make grants to people so that people could fix up their house? And the answer is no. The answer is any funding that the city wanted to put in that would be purely the city's money. And the city's funding for housing affordability is generally largely flowing through the District Social Services Administration Board. So we have done what we can to improve the supply. There's a lot of land out there. We know that there's available land. We've got incentive programs for rental housing and new investment. Actually, our downtown program is very specific. We give particular grants to people who want to create second floor apartments in some of the older buildings in the commercial area of the downtown. And that has been our focus, is what can we do to increase the supply?
Yeah, I do understand that the money flows through housing. Now, that's the one thing I also found interesting, is that you have, the stats from the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, and you do list the wait list from housing, but in terms of affordability and people that are in core need, do you communicate with Sault Ste. Marie Housing to make sure that you're getting accurate stats?
There is a committee, and Mr. Chinazzo sits on it, which has representatives from various housing providers in town. And yes, that's also with DSAB, but we're in contact with DSAB on a number of things fairly, I don't want to say often, but fairly frequently.
Okay. And my only other thing is just a comment. It was the feedback from Dorothy, considering all of the accessibility. There were some really excellent comments and very relevant. Really happy to see that we do have, as part of the autism strategy, there was the design portion of it, which I think we should be really proud of as a community to have that. But I think a lot of the suggestions made by that constituent are very valid, and definitely like to see more equity, diversity, and inclusion practices being put into this official plan. I think that's really important. But thanks very much for the backgrounder. If I have any other questions, I'll email you. I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next on the list, I have Councillor Dufour, and I just want to say again, Councillor Dufour, thank you for bringing this to the agenda, the operating plan, and having this discussion. And before you ask your questions, can you define DSAB for the viewers at home? We use DSAB tonight, and some people still may not know what DSAB stands for, being the chair of that board.
DSAB is the District Social Services Administration Board that oversees Housing Ontario Works, CMS, and childcare in Sault Ste. Marie.
Okay, great.
So we are the conduit to the provincial funding for affordable housing that Mr. McConnell refers to. Indeed, the province is a very big player in that area.
Right, and you do a great job of chairing that particular board. Go ahead with your questions, Councillor Dufour.
Thanks very much. Thank you to all the planning staff for making the time to be here tonight and putting together such a good report. Mindful of my time, I'm just going to start firing away. Mr. McConnell, you mentioned we've kind of circled around the issue of CIPs a number of times with questions about ways that the municipality can intervene in many of these things. Would you be willing to share, what do you see as a realistic time horizon with which the City of Sault Ste. Marie Planning Department would be able to tackle something as significant as a new CIP?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, the process to do that is set out in the regulations associated with the Planning Act. It's basically exactly the same as doing an official plan amendment. It does require public consultation. It does require proper notice. So from start to finish, it would probably be about 6 months.
Okay, is it realistic for the city to be undertaking a new CIP in the midst of completing the consultation on a new OP?
They're separate. I mean, thank you for being cognizant of staff resources or lack thereof some days, but they are separate. So there is nothing to prevent us from proceeding with completing our new official plan and at the same time undertaking a new community improvement plan. They're
Okay,
not direct. They're not directly connected.
No, I understand that, but I do
Yeah.
feel like the community consultation and the conversation, the education that's been undertaken around this table with counselors, I think the two issues are really germane to each other, and tackling both, being able to tackle both, if that was a possibility, I think would play to getting a stronger result in the end. So thank you for answering that. I wanted to go back to a couple of hypothetical questions that Councillor Shoemaker had asked, just to ask some clarification. One of them, we had discussed like a vacant land, a vacant lot raised by fire on Queen Street. You had indicated, Mr. McConnell, that building could be rebuilt and grandfathered into existing regulations. Now, is that the case as well? If the lot is sold to a new developer, would those grandfathered standards travel with the sale?
For you, Madam Acting Mayor, yes. That is a function of the city's zoning bylaw, that the ability to rebuild at what was there before, basically, is stated in the zoning bylaw, and ownership does not matter. Ownership is not something that is taken into account. So the answer to your question is yes, the owner could send it to consult with somebody else who would have the same rights.
Okay, and the only way those rights would be forsaken is if the lot was severed or changed in any way with any adjacent lot?
That's a really good question, and that is such a good question. I think we need to refer that and have a discussion with that on our legal department. That has never come up before.
Well, I'm just curious.
I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, Councillor Dufour.
That's perfectly fine. I'm happy to hear something later on. The other potential scenario that Councillor Shoemaker brought up was the amalgamation of a number of single family lots into something larger for a larger development. And you indicated, Mr. McConnell, that of course would be subject to a rezoning. Now, during the course of that rezoning, were this property potentially in the downtown area, would it benefit from reduced setbacks that would fit in with the character of many of these older homes in the downtown area?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's a very specific question, because it depends on exactly where that building is. If the building is along the waterfront or on Queen Street, the setbacks vary. On Queen Street, there basically are no setbacks. There's no front, side, or rear yard setbacks. You can build lot line to lot line, and you can build as tall as you want. Along the waterfront, we do have considerable setbacks because it's more of a park-like atmosphere, but again, there's no height limitations. If we went up to Albert Street or Wellington Street, there you're probably looking at a rezoning, whereas on Queen Street or along the waterfront, you're not. The zoning would already be in place. Along Albert Street or Wellington Street, we'd really have to look and see at what's the impact on the neighbors. But would they benefit from reduced setbacks? In all likelihood, yes.
Has there been consideration of looking at Wellington and Albert, as having similar setback standards to Queen Street, as a way to kind of recognize that different character of the downtown as a whole place and not just one street?
As of right, like to change the zoning bylaw to do that, I would think no. I think that there's a rationale for reduced setbacks, particularly parking setbacks, but we'd want to see what is the impact on the neighbors. We talk about Wellington Street and Albert Street, and it was correctly pointed out earlier, there are some derelict properties there. On the other hand, there are also some really nice properties that are very well maintained there as well. It's not like, this is not like just clear everything out totally here. That would be my comment on that.
And sorry, if I may, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, generally the official plan is relatively higher level with respect to particular developments. So our official plan would say things like, we allow reduced development standards, we support intensification projects, and then you get down to the site specific, whereas that's where the zoning kind of takes over. Right. And I would argue that in Wellington, Albert, we do have sort of front yard averaging standards, so that if the setback is, let's say, 5 meters, but the house on either side is only 1, then you can take advantage of that. So we do have sort of site-specific zoning type provisions that would allow redevelopment to happen without the need for a rezoning, to sort of be in lockstep with the area that's being redeveloped. But generally, the official plan would underwrite the site-specific policies that you're talking about. And I think our the background report proposes policies that will do that.
That's
Okay.
good clarification.
Yeah, I have a few more questions if that's okay, Ms. Acting Mayor.
Absolutely.
When we look at our housing mix that's being proposed, I believe Mr. Tonazzo said we're looking at more of like an 80-20, whereas traditionally we've been a 90-10. And have we looked to other communities for a housing mix that we could aspire to, rather than just looking backwards on what we have typically done?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, we have not done that exercise, and we could, and I don't know, I don't really know the value that we would get, and I stand to be corrected here, but I'm not sure the value that we would get in trying to aspire to a certain mix. I think what we're trying to aspire to is a mix, not only a mix of housing, but a mixture of uses within that neighborhood. So I don't know if on the official plan basis, we've said, you know what, we want to have X percentage of singles, and we want to increase the percentage of apartment units, or we want to increase the percentage of non-singles. I think we've looked at it at more of a higher level to say that we want a mixture throughout the community, and then rather than the segregation that we by and large have in many cases from the growth that happened in the 70s. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, I mean, an official plan is not necessarily granularly prescriptive with, you have to go live there or such, but it is a gentle nudge in the way that the city wants to direct development, in the way that's going to be, as Mr. McConnell said, the most financially responsible and sustainable way. So, I guess my question is, what housing mix is the most financially responsible and sustainable for Sault Ste. Marie? And can you answer that question without just looking at the type of housing mix that we've typically had?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I think generally speaking, denser forms of housing tend to be more efficiently serviced. And I think that generally stands across the board. But as far as trying to aspire to a particular mix, I think for us, it's just making sure that we have enough housing for everybody. And based upon headship rates, we feel that we will, and that we do.
Okay. My next question, kind of along those lines, can the urban, I don't know if I should be asking urban settlement area or urban service area, but can it be increased outside of the OP process of a new OP, like in the midst of that OP timeline?
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, yes, you can. It would be an official plan amendment. You can apply, a member of the public or a landowner or a proponent can apply to expand the urban settlement area. However, provincial policy dictates the supporting information that you have to have in order to expand the urban settlement area. And basically what that is, it's called a comprehensive review, which is essentially what we've done. So you have to do a population projection, which dictates your anticipated demand for housing or commercial uses or various uses. And then you have to do your residual land needs analysis. So put simply, you have to be able to demonstrate that there's not enough land within the current urban settlement area to accommodate anticipated growth, or there's not enough supply within the current urban settlement area. There's not enough land to adequately accept the growth that's coming, that you project.
Okay, so for the purposes of this group, if a certain area was not added to the urban settlement area as part of this OP, then due to the burden of paperwork required, it's highly unlikely that someone would pursue that in the midst of an OP?
I don't know if it would be the burden of paperwork. I think ultimately they would, we've just done a population projection and we've stated we need 4,000 new homes. With our proposed urban settlement area expansions, we feel we can accommodate 6,000 new homes. And that's in addition to that, we're proposing intensification policies and second unit policies and all that, which is over and above that 6,000. That they would have to be able to demonstrate that either the population projection was wrong or the residual land analysis was wrong, and that we in fact don't have enough land, or that our population projection isn't high enough. And we're pretty comfortable with both.
Okay, Mr. McConnell.
I would like to just add to what Mr. Tenazzo said. I mean, if for some reason the city grows tremendously and, for whatever reason that we couldn't foresee, I mean, staff are monitoring this on a regular basis. We sit down and look at it on a formal basis, the official plan and population and employment every 5 years. And if that were the case, staff would take the initiative and come back to council and say, hey, you know what? We've got a problem here. We need to expand our urban settlement area.
And then at that point, staff could make that argument provincially and it would go through.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. The other question I had, we had talked a lot about real estate subdivisions and it fits into this density question. Is it more sustainable for the city to be promoting higher density or lower density? And when it comes to real estate subdivisions, it sounds like staff's position in accordance with provincial policy is that these lower density uses are less desirable. Would staff's recommendation of real estate subdivisions change if SSM had decided to levy development charges on the cost of new development in years previous?
If I may, Madam Acting Mayor, again, I see those two issues are separate. Okay, one is what form of development is revenue neutral or is negative or is positive to the city from a taxation basis. The other one is how can we increase revenues? So I don't think having development charges would have made a difference to the recommendations or the decisions made at the time, one way or the other.
Okay, thanks. And moving forward, I guess what you're saying here is that you see development charges operating only on the revenue side of the city ledger and not in curbing or controlling or directing demand?
Well, no, the development charges are intended to ensure that new development pays for itself moving forward. Okay, so there is, as a result of new development, there's additional costs that the city is going to incur over the years, and development charges is the mechanism that the province has put in place to allow municipalities to recover that up front. You're saying would that impact demand one way or the other?
Well, as I've surveyed the debate, that has been a point that's been raised. And so I guess I'm just trying to take in everything that's in the official plan and combine it with other conversations that we've had around the issues of development in general. Like a lot of the CIPs that I know have been used by other municipalities, a lack of development charges has been part, an economic lever that's used to incentivize, and I'm saying redirect demand, from one area into another that needs the attention. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand that macro view that staff is taking as they're looking at this background report, bringing in all of this data. I'm trying to balance out two things that I believe are kind of closely related, but we've never talked about in the same conversation. So,
if I may, I think council has been quite clear that they're not willing to look at development charges at this time. There is nothing in the official plan that would either impede or encourage the use of development charges. That's a decision for council if they want to go back and revisit that. It really is a funding mechanism as opposed to a land use mechanism, which is the main focus of the official plan. I'm sorry, Mr. Tenhauser, did you want to add something?
That's okay. Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to your point, Councillor Dufour, and I think maybe you and I have talked about this, but Mr. McConnell is correct. Development charges are a funding mechanism, but they do, and I think you pointed this out, they do create this economic lever, if you will, where, if the development charge, you can incentivize, it opens the door to additional incentives. So for example, you can say development charges in the downtown are rebated or they're less in the downtown. And you can start, for lack of a better term, playing around with the numbers so that you're paying more development charges for certain types of development charges and less or none for other types of development. So it does open the door to, I guess, additional incentive opportunities, if you will.
Yeah, and I think where I'm struggling here, Mr. McConnell, and what I'm trying very hard to understand, because I don't know all of the answers, is when we're looking at increasing the urban settlement area or the urban service area to allow for more development on the north end of town. My fear and what I'm trying to work around is that we will end up displacing assessment and growth from the downtown, from our established neighborhoods, relocating it elsewhere and doing it in such a way that we're not even recouping the costs of that new development to begin with. And to me, that I believe that's the scenario that I'm concerned about as I look at the life of this official plan, and I look at what's happened with the Royal Bank in downtown and moving uptown, what's happened with a lot of the office rezonings that have happened over the years. What I want to avoid and what I want to make part of this conversation with this new official plan is how do we ensure that doesn't happen, and we do that in a way that still accommodates the very real land use needs that you and your department have elucidated here as reasons why we should expand it. That's where I'm coming from.
It sounds like Councillor Dufour, it's a good discussion on maybe a possible resolution in short term on development charges and some of your other ideas.
I actually brought that resolution, and my technology failed me when I had all these questions for Mr. McConnell a couple meetings ago.
If I may, Madam Acting Mayor, just in response, I understand Councillor Dufour's concern, and I mean, it's a very valid concern. What staff tries to do is strike a balance. So you're right. We saw when we built a new hospital up at the, in the northeast part of the city, we saw tremendous assessment growth up in that area around there. That was like the highest assessment growth of any region in the city. Not surprisingly, a new hospital, everybody wants to be around a new hospital. We had a lot of housing built up there. We had some commercial development. We had some office development up there. So what staff tries to do is maintain a balance between having land available for uses moving forward so that we're not driving the price up. And at the same time, you're right, we need to look at the downtown and say, look, we've got a major chunk of our assessment comes from the downtown. We need to protect that. We need to make sure that assessed value doesn't go down. Because if that assessed value simply moves someplace else in town, then we didn't increase assessment, which means we didn't increase tax revenue. So the whole downtown program, and Mr. Churko can talk about this, I know at length, was designed around, in part, I mean, certainly it's quality of life, and yes, let's create a great downtown, and because that's how people judge a community. Let's make it a place people want to go to. But in part around making sure that the assessment that's currently in the downtown doesn't go down. What we've managed to see over the last 10 years is the total value of building permits issued in the downtown is about $120 million. That is a lot of new growth in the downtown. So we have been fairly successful with that. We are getting some new assessment at the edge of the community, but we're maintaining our assessment base downtown as well. That's the balancing act that we're trying to accomplish, are those two things.
Mr. McConnell, that's an excellent explanation. It's an equation. It's a variable. There's fixed equation, fixed variables. That's a very good explanation that you and your team are well aware of the downtown. Continue on, Councillor Dufour.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation, Mr. McConnell, and I look forward to reading the draft OP and keeping this conversation going. But I'm quite fine to let some of my other peers continue, and I'll ask some questions later. Thanks, Ms. Acting Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to let Councillor Gardy know that he is on the list. The next person I have is Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. First, let me thank Mr. McConnell, Tenazzo, and Turco, and of course, all our staff who put work into this document. When you read through it, you can certainly appreciate the work and the detail that went into it. I have a couple of questions. I had 5 or 6, but I'm going to make it 2. The first one, Mr. Tenazzo, is on the report on the consultations. Specifically the request or through the consultations, the former Maplewood Golf Course. It's addressed by saying that it would be difficult to recommend, however, this will be reviewed further and a more detailed response will be provided for consideration. Can you speak to that? What do we mean by we're going to review it and provide it for consideration to whom? Is it coming back to us or?
Okay, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that was a very, it's a very detailed submission, and I think it deserves a detailed response for us. So I think in some respects that's what we're saying. Same with, we had a very detailed submission from Miss McNaughton, and that deserves a detailed response for us. At a very high level with regards to this particular property, when we say it's, I can't, my apologies, the existing word escapes me, but based upon the comprehensive review that we've done, based upon the population projections, the land that we have available for residential development, we don't necessarily support the notion or support the idea that we need additional land and that this is the most appropriate place for that additional land to be included within the urban settlement area.
Okay. Okay. And I guess I think you kind of touched on this in answer to Councillor Dufour's question. I thought that you might have been talking about this one. Of course, with any other applicant coming forward after an official plan is passed, doesn't preclude someone coming forward and still making an application in this manner, let's say for something like this.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, absolutely. We sort of proceed on the basis that really anyone can apply for anything. Now, it has to be a complete application. And when it revolves around, when it involves the urban settlement area, the provincial policy statement is clear that part of that complete application requires you to do that comprehensive review. So again, you have to be able to show that we don't have enough residential land to meet anticipated growth.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. My other question is in regards to the dedication of parkland. I think it was on page 244 of the report. And it talks specifically the section on school sites. I think it reads where school sites are offered for sale, the city shall review and determine if the property or portion of it is required for neighborhood park. So is the intention there? I mean, right now, the way it's been happening is most schools that have been closing, we've seen a lot of repurposing there. And would we go like, I mean, it's not our, we'd have to purchase from the school boards. Now, would our intention be is this the sort of thing that we want to do, is get into negotiation? Should it be parkland, or should we step in between, in the middle of something being repurposed and adding affordable housing, for example, or something like that? Like, where is our priority going to be when we look at something like this?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Nero, that's a great question. I think ultimately the priority is that, you're going to look, we recognize that school sites locally, they're not considered, and we don't consider them park space, but they operate and they act as informal park space after hours. They're publicly owned, so to speak. So we do recognize that they do operate and fill a park space need. I think what we would do is, if we're looking at, I think ultimately our priority is that when that school is sold, if we look at that park space map and say, we've got a coverage gap here, then I think we can really work with the new owner to either give us park space or obtain that park space as a conditional of various approvals. But I think that's where the priority would be, as opposed to, we could certainly look at, there might be some schools where there really is a land use gap, and the only way to satisfy that would be for the city to take on that park space. But I think ultimately you want to work with the developers and obtain those lands and those benefits as a condition of their development.
Right. And I guess what I thought I saw happening was it would all be dependent on the size of the property that we're talking about. I mean, could you still do, a project with affordable housing and still have a section of land available for park space? So, okay, thank you for that, Madam Mayor. Madam Acting Mayor, that's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Muir. Councilor Bruni.
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Mr. Tenazzo, I thank you very much for this official plan, and Mr. McConnell and Mr. Turco. My questions have been asked, and hopefully I'm not repeating myself with some of the questions that were asked, but a little bit of clarification maybe is needed. Mr. Tenazzo, you said the city owns 16% of total park space. So the rest of the 84%, who would be the majority owners of? Would it be the Conservation Authority?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's correct. A lot of it's the Conservation Authority. They have some really big Hiawatha shore ridges. Those are really big acreages.
Right.
So they would be the majority shareholder, if you will.
So they own more land, basically, we'll say outside the city. Would you agree to that then?
That, yes, I would.
Yeah. Okay. Regarding your 7 new land use categories that you're proposing, how are we compared to other municipalities, especially in the northern? Would they have basically the same ones or close to it?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I've looked at all of our northern counterparts. I've looked at all their official plans. I must concede I've never actually counted the number of land use designations that they have and sort of compared it with us. But I would say that we're generally in line in terms of the different types of land use categories that exist. I think because we're a provincially led, we're a policy led planning system, I would suggest that you would see a lot of consistency across the province, but certainly there are some areas where we're a little bit different. I would suggest the Precambrian Uplands area would be somewhat unique to Sault Ste. Marie.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you've touched on this, but once this has been approved by the province and by council, and correct me if I'm wrong, changes can be made to change the official plan. Say for a year from now, maybe there's a change that's required. Is it staff that has to bring it forward, or is it council that has to bring it forward?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, in many respects, it's really quite similar to a rezoning. There are some nuance there, and that the province ultimately can, council simply adopts it, and the province has the ability to get involved. But ultimately, any member of the public or a proponent can make an application to amend the official plan.
Okay, so in a rural area, if there's city services there, and a developer wants to put in a septic and well system, would he be allowed to do that, or he has to stay with the official plan and has to go with the city services?
So through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, right now the current 1996 official plan doesn't make that distinction. We are proposing in the new official plan a policy that says if you are within the urban settlement area, you have to attach to services if you're going to develop. And I believe there's also a bylaw to that effect, potentially under the Municipal Act. So if somebody wanted to make an official plan amendment to that policy, they could, but as a matter of right, they have to tie into services if they're in the urban settlement area. And then they have to go on site if they're outside.
So my question is, and I hope you would agree with me, I know other councillors will, obviously our infrastructure is weak. And we're bringing in more of these developments, and we're hooking up to our city services and all that. What advantage do we have by having them hook up to our city services if they want to put in their own well and septic system? Like, and we're talking about rural, we're not talking about like right in the city here. What
through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I think that comes down to density. So that's the advantage. And if you're on an on-site well and septic, right off the bat, you're as you know, based on current provincial requirements, you're 0.8 hectares or you're a 2-acre lot. And the province has deemed that you need 2 acres, you know, to fit in your septic as well as a replacement, have adequate separation from your well. So really the advantage is density, and you really can't achieve that density on-site well and septic services.
So correct me if I'm wrong, you said if you have minimum 2 acres, is that the limit? 2-acre property?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, right now it's 0.8 hectares, which is just shy of 2 acres. That's the minimum rural residential lot size on well and septic. There are instances where you can accept a smaller lot size, but generally speaking, the norm is just below 2 acres.
Okay. So I guess my last question is, you presented this to council tonight. It's going to come back in March. That's for a vote to proceed with it. Am I correct?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, no, we'll present it in March for information.
Right.
And then at that point, we'll be consulting with the province as well as the public, likely until the summer. And then we'll come back again with a revised draft official plan based upon feedback that we've received. And at that point, we would be asking council to adopt it.
Okay, so feedback from the public and feedback from the province, it comes back to us, and then we would vote on it. Okay, I thank you very much. Thank you to all.
Actually, just to pick up on Councillor Bruni's comment about the 2 acres, I think you were saying, Mr. Tanazo. Can you comment on, currently there are subdivisions that are still being developed that are on septic, that are within our boundaries, that are on a well, and they're not 2 acres. So can you comment on that? So you're saying that it sounds like there's like a rule, but then there are some subdivisions not even fully developed yet.
Yeah, through you, or sorry, Madam Acting Mayor, essentially the Planning Act's not retroactive. So those are viewed as water under the bridge. We've got subdivisions in the airport area, for example, that are far smaller than even an acre. The provincial rules is that new lot creation, you're looking at a minimum of 0.8 hectares or just shy of 2 acres. Anything that exists is considered water under the bridge, so to speak, and can be developed. Now, those small lot sizes, depending upon the topography and types of soils, it can create some challenges for locating a septic. There are technologies out there where you can do it. But again, the ideal and the requirement going forward for new lots is 0.8 hectares.
So hypothetically, if a developer bought a chunk of land, let's say 10 years ago, and he or she just decides today to start developing it, they have to go under the new rules, even though they bought this chunk some time ago.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, interesting.
But if they bought the chunk and created the lots 10 years ago under whatever standard was in place then, they still have the right to develop those lots at that standard if they were created, or to build upon those lots.
Okay. And does the subdivision plan, does it expire? Meaning that if this person had a subdivision plan and it's developed 10 years ago, does it expire after a certain period of time?
Madam Acting Mayor, currently we do not have expiries on our draft approved plans of subdivisions. So no, we've had subdivisions, for example, up on 4th Line where the approvals were in the mid 80s, and then they came back maybe 20 or 30 years later and actually developed the subdivision. We are proposing that as part of this new official plan, we would like to explore the opportunity for having some of these subdivisions having an expiry date, because ultimately things that were approved 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's a totally new regime. It's a totally new set of rules nowadays. And it can create some difficulties and some challenges.
Okay. And just to further that, if that hypothetically that development that was developed 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if it went to a new owner today, they still can go under the grandfather clause.
Yes, that's correct. Ownership doesn't change that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. CEO, Mr. White, did you have any comments on the Municipal Act when we were talking briefly about that, or?
Madam Acting Mayor, I have no comments at this time on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bruni?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. On to Councillor Girardi.
Thanks, Madam Acting Mayor. I appreciate a lot of the questions that have been asked. Some have been pretty sophisticated. Mine will not be, and I'll try and be pretty quick. I have some of these questions to ask based upon some conversations I've had going into this meeting with some people who have given me a call or fired me a message and asked me to ask most of them. The first is my question, though. As it relates to the west end of the community and multi-use paths and or the hub trail, it has been my opinion that we do not have as many as other parts of the community. I think it's important that there's been some on, I know, Woolley Avenue and Core Road. Is there a bit of a plan to address, say, bike paths, more of an east-west corridor than there is currently? And are there plans, and what precisely could they be on connecting more neighborhoods in the west end, west of the most westerly terminus of the west of the hub trail to the rest of the community? So that's my first question to whomever is willing to give me a little bit of background on it.
I can answer that.
Thanks, Steve. Remember,
So-
sorry.
So through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Again, there's sort of two approaches. One is the official plan, and definitely the language in the official plan talks about the idea of complete streets. And in that, as part of new construction of streets and public spaces, we do want to accommodate all forms of mobility, including cycling and pedestrian movement. So, you know, from a policy standpoint, there is that direction in the official plan. More in the immediate term, we are rolling out and going to be commencing shortly our new active transportation master plan, and definitely the idea of spokes from the hub trail leading into the west end and the east end is going to be a priority. We don't have the specific cycling or pedestrian routes identified at this moment. There's definitely a lot of opportunities, but that will be fleshed out as part of that active transportation master plan.
Thank you. Another question through you, Madam Mayor, to whomever is able to answer on the panel here. Has there been much input directly from any groups that are interested or pursuing different recreational or sporting opportunities in the community? Specifically, I've had some conversations with a group that's been looking to make some headway on tennis, and specifically indoor tennis. Is that anything? Have you had some groups approach you about those sorts of items? And if not, I would think you would encourage them to provide input directly to you guys.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. At this point, we have not had any direct discussions with various sports user or a number of sports user groups. Certainly, a group related to tennis hasn't come to us, and yes, we would encourage them to contact us directly, please.
Thanks. Another question. You had referenced, I think, Mr. Tenazzo, about Rosedale being a very good example of a complete neighborhood. You also have all referenced how we're moving towards more complete neighborhoods. You've also referenced that, you know, we have a lot of work to do. Looking at the community as it stands currently, are there any, could you comment on if there are a couple of areas that would be kind of next in line, that would be more quickly or easily developed into a complete neighborhood, kind of quote unquote? Are there any that you see that are just right underneath where Rosedale is as a complete neighborhood?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy, I'll start, and then maybe I'll let Mr. Turco and Mr. McConnell fill in any gaps. A couple of the other examples that I use is I feel like, again, where are these land use gaps where you've got everything but maybe one other thing? I look at some of our higher density residential areas, whether it's towards the east end or even the west end, there are some areas, but more so in the east end, Daisy Road, for example. I think as that area continues to develop and you get more residential uses there, I think at some point there has to be that market established for some commercial uses in the area. Another example I would see as kind of an area that's sort of on the cusp might be parts of our Great Northern Road corridor, where we've got a lot of commercial uses, but not really much in the way of your sort of standard mixed use residential development, where you've got commercial on the ground floor and some apartments above. So those to me would be two areas that are quite ripe for sort of filling in some of those gaps.
If I could just add to that, maybe, I think my definition on these things, and everybody's a little bit different, is I say, can you walk to the grocery store? Can your kids walk to school? And can you walk to a major municipal recreational facility? And with that, I look at the area around Cora Road and Second Line. I mean, you certainly have really good shopping in there. You have some choices for grocery stores. You do have a number of good schools in that area. There are a number of parks in that area. And with the new twin pad hockey rink, that's a major recreational facility. So I would look at that as being a complete neighborhood kind of area. Mr. Turco, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, all good examples. And I think actually there's a lot of neighborhoods, most neighborhoods in Sault Ste. Marie are pretty close to having sort of that idea of a complete neighborhood, with some missing elements that we hope to facilitate as part of this new official plan. I'm going to give a nod to the James Street neighborhood, although it doesn't sort of get recognized as a high profile neighborhood. It definitely should be recognized as sort of a model in terms of how it incorporates different forms of residential densities within an existing neighborhood. Acknowledging that it is missing some key components, but from a residential density standpoint, I think it's a really good example of how a mix of residential densities are within one neighborhood. The other one I would say would be sort of that area south of Churchill Plaza, the John Rhodes area. Within that area, you have a lot of different commercial, institutional, and also open space amenities. So definitely that's another really good example where we're really close to sort of being able to characterize that as a complete neighborhood. But definitely I would say a lot of neighborhoods within Sault Ste. Marie, there's a lot of boxes that you can tick off, with just the exception of a few things that could be added to make it a true complete neighborhood.
That's good to hear. I appreciate all the comments, and it's good to hear that they're very diverse as to where they're situated throughout the community. When it comes to developing those, is there a list? Like, how do you determine where to tackle first? And as you do it, are they prioritized based upon ensuring that we're doing our best to hit different parts of our city, whether they be northwest or east?
I'd like to answer that. Like, with a complete neighborhood, what you want to do, because you can't really control the market. You can't force somebody to build a grocery store. You can't force the school board to build a school there. But by allowing those uses in those areas and increasing the density in those areas, it's more likely you're going to get those kind of other amenities in there, such as grocery stores, other shopping centers, other shopping opportunities, restaurants, recreational facilities. All of that will kind of come together if you can have a high enough density in those areas.
Thank you. May I ask two more questions, Madam Acting Mayor, quickly?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Thanks. And this may not be the time, and you can redirect me. I've had a few people call me over the course of the last week or so, and oddly enough, have mentioned the same thing as it relates to moving traffic around the community. And essentially, I could kind of summarize their comments or their question by saying, city staff, are we, the community as a whole, or city staff, are we against kind of using roundabouts as opposed to formal traditional intersections? Many communities have them everywhere throughout the province, even smaller ones that you wouldn't think of. Are we ever going to see any of those in and around our community moving forward?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, I think Mr. Elliott or Mr. Girardi might be the best to answer that particular question.
Mr. Elliott?
Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. Yes, in the Transportation Master Plan, there was a white paper or an appendix in the Transportation Master Plan that discusses them. One of the biggest problems with roundabouts is they require quite a bit of footprint. They require a lot of property. But we are monitoring traffic at some intersections, and I think you will see roundabouts in the not too distant future. There are some candidates around town. We agree.
Cool. I'm hopeful, and so are these few people moving forward, that we're going to see some. And lastly, oh, you had referenced incentivizing development of some of the provision of rental properties in and around our post-secondary institutions as a possible priority. Are there other municipalities that you have looked to, or that we could look to, who have done a good job at this? And could you ID a couple of them that you could kind of direct us to take a look at if we were curious?
Councillor Gardy, that was put out because it was raised that student housing is a concern. Okay, and we need to increase the level of student housing. We did work a few years ago, and I should let Mr. Chinazzo talk on this. He was the architect of it, to develop guidelines that would help people be good neighbors and get along together, and make it easier for people to sort of to live together with student housing. We then changed the zoning bylaw, mind you, it was at provincial direction, but to allow second units in existing houses to kind of develop that. We haven't looked at incentivizing it yet. I mean, that is something that we recognize this is an ongoing problem, but we haven't had an opportunity to sit down and like really do a thorough survey of other municipalities to say, what kind of incentives do you provide? Mr. Chinazzo, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that answers it through you, Madam Acting Mayor. I think Councillor Gardy, official plans that I've looked at, I sort of took the approach, where are the college towns in Ontario? So I kind of looked at it that way. Hamilton, Kingston, Guelph, London, they I think they've all, their student ghettos, so to speak, have all developed in different ways. And in some cases, they just kind of developed organically. And I think that's probably a safe assumption, that in many cases, they kind of developed organically, whereas we have a chance here to sort of prioritize some things. So from a policy standpoint, we've always taken the approach that student housing needs to be looked at as any other type of housing, whether it's owned, rented, to Mr. McConnell's point, because you can certainly get pushback in some well-established neighborhoods, for example, around Algoma University, where, having a bunch of students move in can perhaps be a little bit unsettling to neighbors. So it is a little bit of a delicate situation, but ultimately, we support our post-secondary institutions, and council was supportive of those rezonings on Hugel Street, where there was quite a bit of pushback. So I think ultimately we're taking the approach that student housing is like any other housing, and we need a mixture of different housing types in a neighborhood to try to avoid sort of that segregation, so that you have all one type of housing. When you have a mixture of housing, it insulates, for lack of a better term, the negatives and the positives, and it makes it works a lot better. It insulates the impact, so to speak.
I think to that point, Mr. Chinazzo, some people are concerned that there may be too many students in one house, but that's a separate topic, separate discussion.
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, that's more of a building code matter, not necessarily a land use planning.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, continue on.
Thank you. And just a comment, Madam Acting Mayor, I'd encourage those of people watching and for the media to push out to those who may not be, that there's still an opportunity for the public to provide input. I think there are a lot of good ideas that we don't necessarily potentially know about that people have. I think it's important considering the demographic challenges, the workforce, the workforce challenges and the working from home phenomenon, that it's as competitive as it's ever been in the province, throughout the country, throughout North America, to compete for citizens and to have a viable, successful community. And this is kind of an all-in effort. So I really ask that all of the community do their best to get word through our social media channels, probably the easiest way, to city staff for this effort. And I think it's also important that we provide some balance in what we do. I appreciate that we want to be careful not to add to urban sprawl. I think we have to be mindful of protecting our city services. That being said, there are different settings that people would like to live in, and there are different developers willing to do different things, and we have to work closely with them. So thanks very much for staff for indulging me and the rest of the council so far tonight.
Well said about, again, remind people to voice their ideas and opinions. And maybe towards the end of this meeting, we'll ask Peter Tenazzo to flash up the key information again, contact, but that's towards the end of the meeting. Is there anything else, Councillor Girardi?
No, that is all. Thank you.
We haven't heard from everyone, so I just want to give the opportunity. Councillor Scott, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Madam Acting Mayor. Just a quick comment, since most of the questions actually have been asked. This has been a very thorough meeting. I just want to double down on what Councillor Shoemaker was mentioning. I would like to see us give more opportunity to make efficiencies by allowing rural development in areas that we already have development. I think that that's important. I think that's something that we should definitely be looking at. I know there's developers out there that have many opportunities to do such a thing, and it would be gaining efficiencies on our city services that already exist. And I think Councillor Bruni mentioned something as well on some of the well and septic matters. And I know that we have some aging infrastructure, so there's some concerns there. So I basically am trying to get at, I don't think that we should totally ignore those opportunities. I think those are things that we should be looking at. And I'd like to see that when staff comes back with a more, with their information in I forget when it was, March, and then again in the summer or whatever the timeline was. But I just wanted to echo those points, and I thought that the questions that everyone else asked were quite thorough. So I'm good for questions.
Right. I think those are fair comments, Councillor Scott. Thank you. I believe we've heard from all council members. If I missed someone, I don't believe I have. At this time, I'm going to ask everybody briefly, if you have any one or two quick questions or comments, I'll give you the floor. Councillor Shoemaker, I did say I was going to come back to you. Do you have a couple questions or comments?
Yeah, just if I could, I was almost done, and Councillor Dufour asked much of what I was, what I had not gotten to, but I did want to just circle back to this urban service line area question. So in an area where, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, in an area where there is existing municipal services nearby, if a developer is willing to extend them at their expense in relatively close proximity, like I don't know what the number would be, but say a couple 100 feet, should we not take that opportunity to essentially expand our service line without having to put our own money into it at this time, or plan for that to happen, as opposed to them having to go through at some point in the future a study of the viability of further expansion of the service line. It seems to me that if the opportunity is there now, maybe we should on paper expand it so that at some point in the future, if these development plans come forward, they can be realized.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, my apologies, Councillor Shoemaker. I'm not sure what the question was. The question is, you're feeling that we should expand the urban settlement area a little bit further than what we're proposing?
Well,
And
I
why
guess
wouldn't we?
if there are proposals in place, and there was one on our agenda tonight, but I know there are others, to expand the urban service line in relatively close proximity to where it already goes, why wouldn't we take
Okay.
those proposals into consideration in the draft official plan, which is going to guide us for the next 20 years, right? So I mean, it might not be something that we necessarily want to see this year or next year, but 10 years, 15 years from now, we very well, may be in a position that's a lot more viable.
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, just as a starting point, it's always the developer that extends the services. The city doesn't normally, for residential subdivisions anyways, the city doesn't normally extend the services. And there are instances where you've got a vacant property within the urban settlement area that does require a little bit of an extension of services beyond just bringing it into the property to service the development. I think really it goes back to that overarching theme of you're trying to develop that sort of sweet spot, if you will, or that balance of, urban densities versus urban sprawl. And I think if we were to suggest, for example, if you are within 100 feet of the urban settlement area, we're just going to enlarge the urban settlement area by 100 feet. That's a significant amount of land. You see in to put it into context, we're proposing those five little additions. That's about 108. That's about 125 hectares of land, close to 300 acres of land, just those small little areas. If you start opening it up to basically the policy that you're proposing really opens it up to, I'm not going to put a number on it, but I'm going to suggest it's probably close to 1,000 acres of land. And then at that point, you're really starting to get into sprawl. And we've got some big vacant properties within our urban settlement area that we are of the opinion need to get developed first. And essentially what you're proposing could result in sort of that leapfrog effect where the entire area, within the current urban settlement area hasn't quite filled up to a point yet, but you've already got developments on the periphery starting to happen. And these developments on the periphery are quite a ways away from, they may have easy access to, your hard services, but they're quite a ways away from some of your social amenities, your commercial amenities, bus routes, public transit, things of that nature. So it just results in this sort of growth outward that we don't feel that we're based on demand and supply. We're not quite there, that we don't need to do that yet. And if we don't need to, I guess the question is then why would we, as opposed to why wouldn't we?
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, if that's the question, and that question might make sense again for 2 or 3 or 5 years, but I'm just wondering, does it make sense for 20 years?
Well, through you, Madam,
are we limiting ourselves?
Through you, Madam Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, there is an interval that we have to do comprehensive reviews of this plan, and that's every 5-year interval. So this is something that we'll continually monitor, and if we're starting to see the need to adjust, then we will certainly do that. So this really isn't about, like, we have the ability to catch this and change this every 5 years or before.
Right. Okay, that's a good reminder, Peter.
So I guess to put it, I guess what we're suggesting at this point in time, it's premature to implement additional urban settlement area expansions beyond those that we're currently proposing.
For at least the next 5 years.
For at least the next 5 years. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Is that your final question, Councillor Shoemaker?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Gardy, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, through you, Madam Acting Mayor, Councillor Shoemaker just kind of jogged my memory. We can wait 5 years, but we're all talking about how competitive things are, and we may not necessarily want to wait 4 or 5 years to tackle some of these issues. We also don't want to be referencing, data that's pre-pandemic, potentially, that's 4 or 5 years old. As I recall, I think when we were talking about commercial occupancy, there was data reference from 2017, which is considerably before the pandemic. It talked about if we are on par or not with other parts of the province that we had a lot more vacancy. I don't necessarily know if that would be the case. I would think some of those numbers would be a lot different. So that's one thing that I wanted to address earlier. I didn't. Forgive me. Thanks for allowing me to do that.
You're welcome. Okay, are there any final comments from any council person? Seeing none, I just want to ask two quick questions to Mr. Tenazzo. A couple of constituents have emailed me with regards to introducing more grass into the community as an environmental friendly approach. As we know, with more grass, less asphalt, there's hopefully reduces greenhouse emissions with regards to global warming and so forth. Does the plan take in consideration more grass? For example, more narrow streets, potentially have one-way streets and have half the road grass. And again, this was brought up to me by several constituents. Can you comment on using grass?
Yeah, Madam Acting Mayor, we certainly, for example, the official plan, we support what we call low impact design where appropriate. So low impact design would be trying to minimize the amount of pavement that you use and using natural vegetation and grass areas to, to help manage stormwater. As far as, we have currently maximum, lot coverage requirements and things of that nature. In terms of minimizing the overall impervious surfaces of the community to the greatest extent possible, I would suggest that yes, we are supportive of that. And that the official plan should bring us in that direction.
Okay. If I may suggest, as you work on the draft, if you can add on a caveat regarding that, I think that would satisfy many of constituents' concerns. And the other question is with regards to tiny homes. You mentioned semi-detached, you mentioned rental, you mentioned townhouses and so forth. Will you be potentially talk further in your plan about tiny homes, since they are quite affordable for a lot of our residents? And we're seeing tiny homes more and more in other communities. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, through you, or sorry, Madam Acting Mayor, we've never not, like from a planning standpoint, we've never not supported tiny homes, and we don't have minimum home sizes that we require and things of that nature. We certainly support density. So while we don't specifically speak to tiny homes, and I think we can look at that and kind of report back to you further on that of whether there might be, some verbiage in the new official plan that speaks to different development standards for tiny homes. Generally speaking, we don't really get involved with minimum square footages or maximum square footages for that matter, as it relates to a residential dwelling.
Fair enough.
So suffice to say, we support them.
Okay, fair enough, because I understand zoning, sometimes other communities use zoning saying this is the tiny home zone area as an example.
That is true, and we can look at that.
Okay, and point two, I also understand, speaking with some of your staff members about tiny homes, they were quite unsure how to approach it because of the building codes and so forth. I'm getting off topic a little bit, but they do go hand in hand. Again, tiny homes are affordable, and it also allows some of our constituents to feel like they own a home and their own budget means. So those are my quick comments on that. I have others, but I'll email you some other thoughts. Hearing no other comments from other councillors, before we close off this meeting, I just want to ask Mr. Tenazzo, can you flash up those key phone numbers, those key social media? Because I really do feel like Councillor Gardy was saying, it's important that we emphasize this. I also want to, at this time, say to our new Siouxites, even those individuals that have moved back to Sault Ste. Marie, and thank you for coming to our community. Thank you for moving back. This is your time to voice your thoughts, your ideas. And those individuals that have lived outside of Sault Ste. Marie, potentially in urban centers, small rural areas, whatnot, those are precious ideas. Those are precious experiences that we can benefit from. I cannot emphasize that enough. Also, others that may travel to other communities, that you feel something has worked in another community that may work for us. Please share your thoughts, share your best practices. I am glad to hear from Steve Turco, Mr. Turco, that you and your team members are looking at best practices. But we live in this community together, and together we're going to make it a better community. This is your time to voice. You still have lots of time to email, call, use social media. Mr. Tanazzo, do you have any final comments? And Mr. Turco and also Mr. Don McConnell, do you have any final comments before we close the meeting?
Madame Actimere, I don't have any final comments other than to thank council for their time and to thank those that have spent their Monday night with us. We appreciate it. And further to what I think virtually everybody has says, if you have a question or a comment or just would like to chat about the development of your community, please contact us. Please contact us by the various means on the screen right now. Thank you.
Fair enough. And Mr. Turco, Mr. Don, do you have any other comments?
Sorry, I'll just add to Peter what Peter was saying, that yeah, I really appreciate the input from council, and it's really positive to see the input from the community, to see how engaged the community is on these issues, and seeing the interest in how the community is going to grow in the next 20 years. So it's been a really good experience, and we thank council and the community for their involvement.
And I'll be real short, Madam Acting Mayor. I just want to acknowledge everybody who has participated to this point. We're at the stage now where you've got a plan. This is how you make the plan better, which is getting comments from council and from the members of the public and their thoughts. So again, I encourage everybody to contact us, give us some thoughts, and don't be afraid to call and just ask questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And you're right, Mr. McConnell. Thank you to all those individuals and families that have taken time to write to us, and your thoughts, your opinions were very well received by council. And my fellow councilors, thank you for your time and also your wonderful ideas. And to reiterate, I appreciate the new families, individuals that have recently moved to our Sault Ste. Marie and moved back to our community. Please just continue to give us more ideas. Having said that, Madam Clerk, would you like to please read? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a motion by Councillors Vezo, Allen, and Nero, resolved that the report of the senior planner dated February 7, 2022, concerning the official plan background report be received as information. That vote is on your screen for voting.
Yeah, and all in favor, if you. Very good. I don't see anyone posing, and I know there was.
Sorry, I'm looking for a vote from Councillor Christian.
He's gone. He had to leave our meeting.
Okay. Councillor Vezo Allen.
I don't see.
She left the meeting as well.
Yes.
Councillor Hilsinger.
I don't have my e-scribe open. I vote to adjourn.
We'll get there.
Yeah,
This one is to accept the report.
Yeah.
In the affirmative?
Yes, sorry.
Councillor Bruni?
I accept.
Councillor Nero?
No e-scribe available. I am in favor.
And Councillor Scott?
I also have my e-scribe closed, but I'm in favor.
Okay, so that is 8 in favor, 1 conflict, and 2 absent. And that will bring us to a motion by Councillors Dufour and Bruni that this council shall now adjourn.
And before we do that, I just want to again say thank you, merci, and miigwech, and all in favor to adjourn. Thank you everyone for your time, and thank you staff for all your hard work. Have a good week and Valentine's. Thank you. Stay safe and support your restaurants.